Good evening and welcome to the regular city council meeting of, well, actually, I guess it wouldn't be, it is a regular meeting, but it's on a Tuesday, May 29th, 2018. At this time, can we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember DeRosa.
Here.
Councilmember Lane.
Here.
Vice Mayor Klein.
Here.
Councilmember Rhino.
Here.
And Mayor Vieira.
Here. Next, we will have the invocation by Lauren Gregory of the Victory Assembly of God, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Father, we come before you tonight, and Lord, we just ask you again for wisdom, Lord, as we handle the people's business. Lord, let us be fair and equitable, and let us see justice. And bless these proceedings, and just have your hand upon them. We ask this, Lord, in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. This evening we have one presentation. It looks like the Ceres Street Fair presentation.
Mayor, we have to reschedule that this evening. It'll be scheduled for June 11th. There was a scheduling conflict, so we'll move that to the June 11th meeting. My apologies.
Okay. The next we will move to citizens' communication to council on matters not included on the agenda. While the city council welcomes and encourages participation in city council meetings, adopted rules allow no more than 5 minutes for expression of non-agenda items. Matters under the jurisdiction of the city council and not on the posted agenda may be addressed by the general public. However, California law prohibits the city council from taking action on any matter which is not on the posted agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the city council. Citizens are entitled to address the city council on any agenda item subject to the 5-minute provision. At this time, is there anyone that would like to address the council on a non-agenda item? Please come forward and state your name.
Dave Pratt of Ceres. I hope everybody had a great long weekend, and I want to thank those that made it to our ceremony at the Ceres Cemetery yesterday. Right now, it's kind of hard to get a whole crowd anymore because more and more organizations and cities are coming up ways to celebrate Memorial Day. I was at Santanella Sunday, and it's getting smaller. The old guard's dying off, and like I said, more and more events are coming up. And then after the Ceres Cemetery, several of us went. The sheriff's department had a dedicated new veterans memorial there on their grounds, so there was a pretty good turnout for that also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Leonard Shepard. I feel like an old car. You fix something, something else breaks. Sunday night I twisted my ankle, and Memorial Day I went 2 places, the grocery store and to bed. It seemed like his right foot swelled up the size of a football. So I hope you know what walking around with a football on your foot is like. That's the way it was. But Memorial Day is not just one day, and it's not a holiday weekend. Me personally, Memorial Day is every day. I don't know how many of you notice that there are a lot of men and women walking around wearing veterans' caps. Branches of service they served, whether it be Vietnam, very, very small amount of World War II, Korean War, mostly Vietnam veterans. My personal duty, I feel, is to thank each one of them. So to me, every day is Memorial Day. Every day I remember people like my uncle, who was in the U.S. Navy in the Pacific, my cousin who died in Vietnam, and a whole bunch of friends and family members, and I remember them, and that's why I walk up to these people and say, thank you for your service. Memorial Day is not a holiday. It's a day that we should keep in our hearts. But like I say, to me, it's every day. Every day, remember those people who served, whether you knew them or not. I like to go up to this little place where they have a lot of chickens. It's called Chicken Ranch. And there's a fellow up there that I met him about 3 years ago. He's a U.S. Air Force veteran. I can't even remember his name, and he can't remember mine, but we call each other the fireman and the warrior. And we see each other, and whenever we see another veteran, we thank them. So if you're a veteran, thank you. If you're not, thank one, because they're the people. And I'll even say, thank our police and fire, thank our emergency responders every day, because they're the ones that keep us safe. So just make sure those veterans that you know you care about them and appreciate them.
Is there anyone else who would like to address the council on a non-agenda item? Please come forth and state your name for the record.
My name is Shirley Rogers, and I've been in Ceres for 45 years. I was a treasurer for the War Memorial that's in the park, and I want to thank you all for having it cleaned up. I sent the pictures on to Glenn Perales, and I'm sure that he's going to be thankful also. That's it, short and sweet.
Thank you. Or anyone else?
Gene Yakeley series. Recently I talked to Diane, the city clerk, and she informed me I called her in concern of the revisal or improvement of the city ordinances in Ceres, and she told me that the city attorney was reviewing those, and I was kind of concerned on how that's going and the process and what kind of reviewing is being done on particular items maybe, or just the general whole mess.
As council authorized in November of last year, the city is endeavoring in the process to update our entire municipal code with a comprehensive update from start to finish. Every aspect of our municipal code will be reviewed and updated to meet current codes. That process is about to be rolled out to staff in the next month, and then it is scheduled for consideration by the public hearing process in August of this year. We'll likely take every meeting through the summer for final adoption of each aspect by November, tentatively looking at a implementation date of January 1 of 2019.
So I was given August 13th.
That's when the process would start.
That's when it starts.
That would be the first
They'll
hearing.
be able to have input from the citizens?
Yes, there would be public hearings.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Is there anyone else? Okay. Next, we will move on to appointments to boards and commissions. We have none this evening. Conflict of interest declaration. Is there anyone on the council that would like to declare a conflict of interest on any of the consent calendar items or public hearing or new business items? Okay. Hearing none, we will move to the consent calendar. All matters listed on the consent calendar are considered routine in nature and will be enacted by a single motion unless otherwise requested by an individual council member or the public for special consideration. Otherwise, recommendation of staff will be accepted and acted upon by roll call vote. At this time, is there anyone on the council that would like a consent calendar item pulled for further discussion?
5A, 6, 9, and 10.
All right. At this time, is there anyone in the audience that would like a consent calendar item other than the ones identified pulled for further discussion? Okay. With that, I'll bring it back to the council for direction on the items that were not identified.
Move to approve. Move to approve 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, B and C, 7, 8, 11, and 12.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we have the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember DeRosa?
Yes.
Councilmember Lane?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Klein?
Yes.
Councilmember Rhino?
Yes.
And Mayor Vieira.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, first item, general correspondence, information only. Item A, Public Works Monthly Report for April 2018. Councilmember Rhino?
We haven't accepted the downtown project as complete yet, have we? No.
No, not yet.
So as part of that, shouldn't the landscaping be covered by the contractor and not by city staff?
That is correct. City staff is assisting in that process, but yes, the contractor is ultimately responsible still. And we did extend that contract past what typically would be approved in a kind of establishment period, which is kind of normal process. We did extend that for a full year, so they will be maintaining that landscaping for the balance of the fiscal year starting July 1.
Doesn't maintaining include pulling weeds?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so in the Public Works Monthly Report for April, under landscape maintenance, it says removed all weeds at the corner of 4th and North Street and installed 13 yards of chocolate bark. And I can understand that that may have been done because of the upcoming street fair, but I'm wondering why staff did not contact the contractor to do that prior to our staff doing it, because we're already short-staffed.
I don't know if Sam or one of the engineers were involved in that. I don't know.
We can check in that for you and get back to you on that. I'm not aware that coordination did not happen, but we can find out for you.
I know it was in preparation of the street fair. I just don't
And-
know why the bark and all that happened, why staff was there.
Why staff did the work.
Correct. That's what I don't know. We need to ask one of the engineers to find out if they coordinated with the contractor or not.
Well, who on city staff would have authorized our people to go out there and do that work?
If there were anybody, it'd be Rob, the landscape supervisor. But again, I didn't know. At the time, I didn't know. So we need to check with one of the engineers tomorrow, and then we'll send you a
Okay,
note.
and you'll let me know?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay.
Move to adopt item 5A.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can we have the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember DeRosa?
Yes.
Councilmember Lane?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Klein?
Yes.
Councilmember Rhino?
Yes.
And Mayor Vieira.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Item number 6, final adoption and second reading. I'm assuming you pulled this because you,
Because I'll vote no, because that's how I've been
okay.
voting.
Do you want me, you don't need me to
I don't
read all
need 'em,
these, do you?
no.
Okay. So does anybody want to make a motion on this item?
Move for approval of item 6.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we have the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember DeRosa?
Yes.
Councilmember Lane?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Klein?
No.
Councilmember Rhino?
No.
And Mayor Vieira.
Yes.
Motion passes 3-2.
Item number 9, resolution number 2018-052, approving federal and local retainer consultant services agreement for general engineering, traffic engineering, material testing, and architectural services for a 1-year extension and authorizing the city manager to execute the agreements. Councilmember Rhino?
It's just a clarification question. All we're going to do is extend the agreements, but if they needed to spend more than what we already have in the amount not to exceed, that has to come back to the council?
The actual retainer agreements do not have a not to exceed except for the federal contract. The rest of them do not. So the federal contract, which is with Interwest, that's a state requirement through the federal government. That's the only one with a not to exceed, but you're correct. The extension of those, the rest of those agreements, there is no not to exceed amount. The only one that would need to come back would be if for some reason we exceeded the federal portion of the contract with Interwest.
So when that was originally approved, did we just say carte blanche, or was there an amount that we talked about?
Well, actually, what we did originally, when we created this process in 2012, back when I was a city engineer, we were having a tremendous amount of difficulty getting retainer, or getting contract engineering agreements approved. It was quite difficult. So we created the retainer process, and the first 2 years, we had a not to exceed of $150,000. And after 2 years of demonstrated success, we removed that cap and moved forward with unlimited, basically the caveat, as long as those projects are budgeted, then it doesn't need additional council action. If for some reason we wanted to work on a design of a project that was not budgeted, that would take council approval. But as long as the projects were approved in the capital improvement budget with council action, then we can consistently move forward with those on an annual basis.
But it could be something that maybe was approved in 2015, and now we don't have the money, and we wouldn't have any say now if it were to go forward and spend more than what we originally thought we would be spending.
Well, we're talking about capital projects, 98% of which are non-general funded. So generally, if a project is budgeted, the only time we generally need more money for a project is during construction, not during design. So these are design contracts for the most part. So generally speaking, that doesn't happen because our limitations are generally in the general fund, and most of our capital projects are not general fund allocated.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, I'll look for direction.
Move to adopt resolution number 2018-052.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we have the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Durosset,
Yes.
Councilmember Lane,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Klein,
Yes.
Councilmember Rhino,
Yes.
and Mayor Vieira.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, item number 10, resolution number 2018-053, ratifying a letter of agreement between the City of Ceres and Ceres Professional Firefighters Association Local 3636, modifying Article 6, probation, appointments, reduction in force to clarify reinstatement after layoff provision. Councilmember Rhino?
Do we have that same verbiage in all of our MOUs?
Which verbiage? The
The
seniority
verbiage
clause?
that we're looking to modify, the probation, appointment, reduction in force. The reason I'm asking is, it seems like if we have it in all of our MOUs, are we, when we're negotiating, are we going to modify those at the same time?
Yeah, I'll take a look at those. This was kind of an urgent matter to get taken care of, so I just paid attention to getting this one correction done. But yeah, if we'll review and if we find the same language, we'll clarify as well.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll look for direction on this item.
Move to adopt resolution number 2018-053.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we have the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Durosset,
Yes.
Councilmember Lane,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Klein,
Yes.
Councilmember Rhino,
Yes.
and Mayor Vieira.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, we have no unfinished business this evening. We have one public hearing item, resolution number 2018-056, approving the engineer's annual report, confirming the assessment and ordering the levy for the 1987 Landscaping and Lighting District for fiscal year 2018-2019.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an annual process of updating the LLD. Process is the same that we've done on an annual basis. We have been able to move that up a little bit this year. I know we've had concerns in the past of not being able to get this adopted prior to the fiscal year, so we were able to accomplish that this year. All in all, the overall LLD funding and mechanism stays in essence the same, just a small increase consistent with the original adopting language for the LLD. All in all, those costs associated with maintaining those facilities are continuing to exceed the revenue for each of those districts, creating strain, and that's where the general fund helps to assist the maintenance of those areas, and that's obviously we'll have a robust discussion of landscape maintenance as part of the budget. But for the purposes of this, open up the public hearing, conduct any input from the public, and then we'll look for council direction. I'm available for any questions you may have, and Jeremy will be able to answer any questions as well.
Okay, are there any questions? Okay, at this time, I'll open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council for direction, or discussion and direction.
I have a question. Under the median landscaping, it says contract. Is that, and I think I asked this question last year too, about the actual contract. Do we have contracts with individual groups who perform that work?
Howard Training Center.
Howard Training Center, okay. So the reason, let's say Brown median maintenance budget, the contract's for 15, 411, 48. But do you know how much we spend for, or they're just all lumped in?
Correct.
They're all lumped in.
Yeah, so there's no, I mean, we have a square footage fee that we collect. They charge us on the square footage, so we don't know. It's like 1.5, 2 cents per square foot, something like that. And I can go through and break them out, because I do have a very long list of every one of them, the cost for each one of them.
Because I know we've talked about this before, about how the medians, down Aristocrat and everywhere, how bad they look. But we just don't have the money the money's not being generated.
Correct.
Through this process.
Right. There's not enough money being generated through this process, and we're also working now with the West Point
Assessment District.
The West Point Assessment District, where that's being removed, and part of that, there's some fees that we're going to put back into those areas out in that subdivision.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'll look for direction on this item.
Move to adopt Resolution 2018-056.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we have the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember DeRossa?
Yes.
Councilmember Lane?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Klein?
Yes.
Councilmember Rhino?
Yes.
And Mayor Vieira.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. We'll move to new business. Item number 14. It's related to the November 6, 2018 municipal election. Item 14A, resolution number 2018-057, calling for the holding of a municipal election to be held on November 6, 2018 for the election of the District 1 and District 2 City Council members and for the submission of 2 ballot measures to the city's qualified voters relating to the position of the city treasurer and a cannabis business license tax amendment to Cannabis Ordinance 2017-1039 and 2017-1043. I guess we'll take these one at a time.
I'll give you an introduction of the overall, and then we will need to take separate action just because the last item, we do need to you need to appoint 2 members to the committee. So as the council is aware, we had a discussion item a few months ago talking about these particular items for consideration, and council gave staff the direction to move forward on the 2 ballot measures. One, changing the treasurer position from an elected position to an appointed position, and then secondly, placing a cannabis business tax on the ballot. As we discussed previously, the idea of that tax would be a backstop to the development agreement format that we are currently utilizing for the cannabis business activities within our city. The development agreements that we have executed expressly eliminate those businesses from being subject to that tax. This tax would be in place only if the council moved in that direction to implement the tax, and the premise would be if for some reason our development agreements were found to be legally invalid. We do still feel that the development agreement is the most effective route for us from a both enforcement standpoint as well as a collection standpoint. So we do maintain that. However, it's a general tax that has to be on a normal, regular ballot. So if we don't put it on the ballot for 2018, we'd have to wait till 2020, which is uncomfortable with the call it the legal affairs of cannabis in California and the nation. So this is really just a safety measure to ensure that we have some mechanism for collecting if for some reason the development agreements were found to be invalid. So those are the 2 items that we placed on the ballot. Also, obviously, the election, as the council may recall, 2015, we moved to the district election process. 2017, being consistent with SB 415, we moved from odd year elections to even year. So 2018 will be our first election for district elections for the two districts 1 and 2 that would be up in November. So this is the action to get to the county to start that proceeding and get those set in place. And the last piece is to have council appoint 2 members to assist staff and legal with the preparation of the ballot arguments in favor of those two items, or really 3 items on the ballot. Available for any questions you may have.
Okay, are there any questions, I guess, on any of the 3 resolutions?
Well, I do have a question as far as the taxation of the cannabis. Is the medical cannabis is non-taxable? And would it stay non-taxable?
It's non-sales taxable. So it's not subject to sales tax, but it would be subject to this tax. This would
So
be a business license
if we
tax.
impose a citywide tax, then it would be subject to
Correct.
a taxation?
Correct.
Okay.
And the way it is drafted currently, the ordinance would be an up to 15%, but set by council resolution. Likely be somewhere well below that, but council resolution would set the actual tax rate. The ballot measure would allow it to go up to 15%. Most folks are using a number between 4 and 8%.
And the council in the future would have the discretion whether they want to bring it back and adjust the tax rate?
Correct. Yeah, that's the way it's written. The ordinance allows for the actual rate to be set by council resolution. So it wouldn't take any further voter action. It would just take council action to set the actual rate.
Okay.
Councilmember Rhino?
I have a question about the city treasurer. The staff report reads like we would, if it does pass, that we would recruit for that position.
That would be up to council. You would be able to determine whether you want to recruit for the position or alternatively change the job description and incorporate those job duties into the finance director or some other position. You'd have the ability to decide that once it changes from an elected position to an appointed position.
And so that would be why it's not included in the budget?
Yeah, it's a council consideration. The current incumbent's term runs through November of 2019.
Correct, but I'm just thinking, I can't imagine that the city treasurer needs to be a full-time position.
Not likely with our current structure, but I mean, that's a decision if the voters were to make this change that for next year's budget, the council would need to make that determination and budget accordingly for the fiscal year 19-20 budget.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this item? Okay, at this time, I'll open it up to the public if anyone would like to comment on any of these resolutions. Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council.
Need to take them separately? I think that's what
Tom,
you
do you
said.
want them separate or all at once?
If you could figure out who you want to appoint for the third one, you
Oh.
could take them together.
I'll move to adopt
Wait a
2018-057.
minute, before we do that, we need to appoint.
I was just going to just go to the 2,
Oh, okay,
and that way we can discuss the second one, the
Okay.
third one.
Second.
So I'll move to adopt 2018-057 and Resolution 2018-058.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Can we have the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember DeRossa?
Yes.
Councilmember Lane?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Klein?
Yes.
Councilmember Rhino?
Yes?
And Mayor Vieira.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, at this time, before we have a discussion, is there anyone on the council that would like to offer up their services to be on the committee?
When are they going to be meeting, do you know? What's the time structure on that?
Probably whenever you would like to.
Perfect.
Sooner is better. We'd like to get that done as soon as possible, to get that to the county and get that off of our to-do list.
I'll be one. If you guys don't mind.
I'll do the second one.
Okay. You want to make the motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion. Move for resolution number 2018-059
With,
Councilman DeRossa and Councilman Klein serving on the committee.
okay.
Second?
Do we have a motion and a second? Can we have the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember DeRossa?
Yes.
Councilmember Lane?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Klein.
Yes.
Councilmember Rhino.
Yes.
And Mayor Viera.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, next we'll move on to discussion items. We have 2 discussion items this evening. The first item is item number 15, discussion of community event and activities grant program recommendation from the Transient Occupancy Tax TOT Ad Hoc Committee. Mr. Wells?
Thank you, Mayor Vieira. So as the council may recall, the committee was formed at the end of last year and began meeting in January with the idea of carrying out the council's direction to explore opportunities for a program to utilize some portion of the TOT to in essence, create some opportunity for the growth of the TOT and finding a way to reinvest those funds back into the community. So the committee met again in January and on a monthly basis, wrapped up their work in April, and the document that is included, which was called the Community Event and Activities Grant Program, was the accumulation of those efforts, largely formulated after the City of Turlock's effort. City of Turlock used a similar format for many years under their Chamber of Commerce and Visitors Bureau. When that was ceased to exist a few years ago, it moved under their Parks and Recreation Department. And so I went and met with the City of Turlock and how their program was working, and then reported that back to the committee. And the committee wrestled with this overall program and ended up coming up with a concept for council kind of direction and consideration, and then if approved, would need to be incorporated into the budget, which we will discuss next. The overall framework would be a process for this first year, where it basically will be about a 6-month process, where we'd start applications later this year for funding of activities between January 1 of 2019 and June 30th of 2019. The committee recommended an allocation of $20,000 for the first year of the program to be reviewed on an annual basis, and with a maximum of each event being up to $5,000. And the criteria and the grant layout is there in the packet, with as long as a sample scoring sheet. Like I said, a lot of conversation between the committee members on who should be eligible, not eligible, how this program should be structured. A very good discussion. Councilmember Rhino and Councilmember Dorosset both participated on that program, and I'll give them opportunity to provide any additional comments, but I'm available to answer your questions that you may have.
Are there any questions, or staff? Just for clarification for the audience's benefit, the TOT tax is the tax that all of us pay when we stay in a hotel in a different city. So I think we've got 1 or 2 hotels here. So anytime somebody from out of town comes or stays at one of the hotels, there's a tax on there. The money that is generated from that is what we're talking about here. So it's not anything that the local citizens typically are taxed for, unless you're renting a hotel room in town. So with that, if there are no other questions, I'll open it up to the public to see if anybody had any comments on this. Okay, hearing none. So this is a discussion item. Are you looking for just acceptance, direction, or?
That's where the council the idea of incorporating into the budget would happen with the budget discussion, because that is an item as part of the budget. But in terms of, is the program what the full council was expecting? We had 2 members appointed to participate in this, and this is the document that was created from the committee, kind of looking for direction that, this hit the full council, it hit the mark, or didn't hit the mark. We'd like to see some changes, or maybe it's not this year. Like I said, we can have that conversation as part of the budget, or is there framework changes that are necessary? It's open for council discussion.
Vice Mayor Klein?
Well, when the TOT tax first was passed, it was brought before the city council what to do with the money, and it was basically earmarked or going back into the general fund. I was absent during that meeting, and I asked for this to be brought back with the intention of my discussion was that I would like to see the committee, or not the committee, the citizens benefit from as a whole, where we could take a certain percentage, whether it's 3% or 5%, and funnel it to the recreation department for the Halloween festivity, concerts in the park, the Christmas Christmas tree lane opening and things like that. And that was where I was going to try to get that a little bit, more earmarked for that. So the citizens and the community as a whole would benefit from it. And that was the direction. Because, I feel that there's a lot of organizations within the city of Ceres, whether it's Rotary or Lions Club or let's just say Whitmore Mansion, different things like that already have a budget in place and already have things in place for to promote those activities, for their activities. That I was just trying to bring it back to enhance the Parks and Recreation Department for the community events. So knowing what my direction was, I'm not in favor of going this way.
Councilmember Lane?
Yeah, I think we appointed a committee to do the job, and I think they've done an excellent job, actually. And I think this could be based on a year-to-year evaluation. That's what I'm hearing, correct? I think they spent a long time on it, and you're right, Mike, that was talked about. However, I wasn't in the meeting with these folks, with our two council members, and I have complete confidence in them. What they're proposing is something that they all agreed upon with members in the community also. So I would be in support of putting $20,000 into the budget upcoming, so we would be able to fund this.
Okay. Councilmember Rhino?
Well, the direction that the committee went was rather than giving recreation additional money for day events, that we wanted to give the money to, say, they were going to have a concert or something out at the golf course, and that people might stay in, or they are required that they're going to stay in one of our hotels. Then they're going to be generating even more money to that fund, and basically, I don't want to say rewarding, but kind of as a thank you maybe to the hotel owners, because they're the ones that are really, the people that are staying there are really the ones who are affected by the tax, not the general community. But that was the direction we went. We wanted it to go to an event, and that's what is in this application, to an event that would conceivably generate more hotel traffic. And for the concerts in the park or for the Halloween festival, that's just local people that use that.
Okay. Councilmember Drossett?
I think we worked really hard on this, Linda.
I do too.
I do too. It was neat to have these people that were in the room, from Parsons to Mrs. Moore and Thornberry, and just to see and hear what they had to say in regards to how they believe money should be spent. Because we did go round and round trying to figure out how much we were going to spend, what we might spend it on. But at the end of the day, the money is to hopefully come back to the community. It's maybe bring people from either inside a series or outside a series to come out, obviously use the hotels. And one of the biggest taxes we have is the gas tax. And by getting more people here and filling their tanks up, I think it's a great thing. And again, this is 1 year. It's even a half a year for the most part, because that's only half the money. So at the very end of the day, if for some reason this isn't working out, then we'll go in kind of a different direction. But I think it's a great start, and we'll just see how it goes.
Okay. Any other discussion? So, I got to say, do we need a motion on this item?
You don't need a motion on this item.
just direction.
All you need is direction, and then what we'll bring back is the adoption of that program after the budget's approved, so that we'll have a budget approved for funding for the program after the full budget's approved, Obviously, that's a step that we'll need to discuss here with our next item. Then you'd approve the actual program that's here as a draft form, you'd approve that program, and then we'd start the application process.
So what I'm hearing from the council is that they're, with the exception of Vice Mayor Klein, they're in agreement with what has been put together by the ad hoc committee.
That's what I've heard so far.
What's that?
That's what I've heard.
Yeah, so at this point, go ahead and move forward, bring it back to us. Okay, item number 16, draft budget fiscal year 2018-2019 presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Vieira. Oh, that time of the year already. Time flies when you're having fun. So this evening, it's my pleasure to present the draft budget for fiscal year 18-19. This is not the budget for your approval. Again, we scheduled this as a discussion item. There's still a lot of work left to be done, but this evening we will cover a lot of ground, look for your input on a number of very important, critical aspects. But first, I want to take the opportunity to thank Suzanne and her team for a fantastic job getting us to this point. The rest of the department heads also. This year was probably the smoothest that I've been a part of, and this would be the 5th budget that I've worked on as the city manager. So it was refreshing to have a conversation where we actually had a little bit of cushion in the conversation moving through the process. So that has not been the case in most budgets. To get to this point was having to cut several $1 million out of the draft budget before we got to this point. In this case, we didn't have to do that, which was, again, very refreshing. And we'll get into the details as to why that happened. So here's kind of the overview of what we'll be covering, and we'll just kind of jump right into it. Again, any comments or questions, please stop me at any time. We can answer those questions right as we jump into it. So current fiscal year 17-18, so for the fiscal year that ends June 30th, 2018, so beginning fund balance, $3.8 million. Our projected revenues of 20.2. That's an updated revenue number. Projected expenses, 19.8. For a projected fund balance of $4.2 million, and you can see there below 21% of expenditures. That's a pretty significant change from where we started this budget year, where we were projecting to hit 18% of general fund expenditures for the reserve balance. So pretty significant change. We actually are projecting to end the fiscal year 17-18 net positive, which is obviously a big deal for where we've been for the last 4 or 5 years. So kind of digging into those numbers a little bit, the revenues are clearly the upside, with about $900,000 in increased revenue made up of sales tax as well as the cannabis revenues that we've discussed previously. The projected expenses are coming in right at budget. Obviously, there's still a month or so left in expenditures, but watching those relatively closely, but we do expect that to be net positive for fiscal year 17-18. Those final draft and all of that information gets wrapped up later in the year for those final numbers, which generally doesn't get done until September, October, sometimes rolls a little bit later than that, depending on the schedule for our auditors. So all in all, I've used this phrase, the budget for 17-18 ended much better than we expected. I use that phrase, much improved, but not yet healthy. And when I use that phrase, healthy, there's still some pretty significant needs across our organization, and every department has needs that haven't been addressed over the past really 10 years. And this council has been very consistent in the last year or two about the needs for our employees to be compensated and raises to be done, and that's obviously something that needs to be addressed, and those negotiations are ongoing. As we look forward to fiscal year 18-19, the revenues are growing. You'll see as I get into the details here that the revenues are exceeding our Great Recession numbers from 07, 08, 08, 09. So that's all good news. But California has been in a upcycle, positive growth for nearly 7 or 8 years now, which is one of the longest growth cycles in California history. So most economists are saying that there's a recession around the corner, whether that's 2019 or 2020. My crystal ball's not that good, but some of the experts are saying it's probably 2020, but others will say 2019. So obviously something we need to be conscious of how that plays out over the course of the next couple years. And as I mentioned, the negotiation with the employee groups has been initiated and is ongoing, obviously as a top priority for the council and management staff to try to get those done as soon as possible to get those reflected within the budget. So just an overview of the process. It's the same process we've used every year on how we get the budget put together. As I mentioned, thanking all the staff, kind of stepping through the process of initiating it with the internal service funds and the fixed costs, and we get together where I review each department on an individual basis. Finance department obviously does the lion's share of the work there, and then it is presented here for the council as a draft document. So we're going to jump into the good part of things, which is the revenues. It's the same chart that I've shown for the past 5 years, just updated to reflect the current 18-19 draft, and you can see pretty significant increase in the overall revenues. We're up over $21.5 million in revenues. A far cry from where we were back in 2010, 2011. We were down in that $14 million range. So pretty significant increase over time. Made up from all of our revenue segments. Next chart, again, is one that I've shown for the last 5 years as well. So this is that same information I just showed you, just broken out to show the difference between salaries and benefits and the other fixed costs that are shown there. The green bar, you can see those other fixed costs are relatively flat year over year, but those costs on the salaries and benefits have been increasing year over year. And those are reflected in both retirement costs, health insurance costs, workers' comp, and those other items continue to go up over time. So a breakdown of the revenue that we see kind of in the big picture. So sales tax is the biggest share there of about 30%. That's our single largest revenue source. Motor vehicle in lieu is 18%, property tax 12%, and with the 3 development agreements, that's now making up 8% of our general fund revenues for fiscal year 18-19. So we'll step in and kind of look at the details. Sales tax, again, 30% of the general fund. This is where the sales tax kind of makeup is, what we get from that. Generally speaking, we get 1% of that, and then the 2 special measures, Measure H being a ½ cent, and then Measure L for the county road tax at another ½ cent. We get, obviously, a portion, our share of that sales tax. So the sales tax, again, shown kind of year over year. If you recall, back in 2015, 2016, the triple flip, which is we'll call it a state gimmick of accounting, ended finally. We're back to just a pure sales tax, and that number, 5.8 million, is above last year. And comparing for the same period of time today to last year at this time, we're up about 11% year over year through the same time frame. There's still about 4 payments left from the sales tax because there's a lag of about 4 months. So we are optimistic that we may get close to the $6 million range for sales tax, which obviously is pretty significant. A couple things that come into play there. One, the adult use of cannabis. That is a sales taxable item, and we'll start to see that revenue creep into there with our forecast from Muni Services, who is starting to capture and see those revenues come into play. Motor vehicle in lieu, used to be called motor vehicle license fee. Basically, it's been reformulated over the past couple years to, in essence, mirror the property tax. So if you look at the shape of this graph versus the next one I'll show you for property tax, it follows the same format. So bottom line, again, it's just exceeding the peak year 07-08, 3.7 million, and we're going to be close to 3.8 million this year. So again, another positive there. This makes up about 18% of our general fund revenues. The top 3 revenue sources, sales tax, property tax, and motor vehicle in lieu, make up 60% of our general fund revenues. So again, the shape of that graph is very similar for secured property tax. Again, we're exceeding the peak year of 07-08, just barely, but we do forecast to exceed that for fiscal year 18-19. And this again, the secured property tax makes up 12% of our general fund revenues, the 3rd largest revenue source. And so in the revenue, what we've included from the development agreements, the 3 DAs, so for Case Manufacturing, we've included their agreed upon dollar amounts, which again was $50,000 per month for the first year. from when they started, so that runs through November, and then it jumps up in December to 75,000. So that's included in the forecast. And then the two other development agreements, the dispensaries are the minimums are what's included in the current draft budget. So again, the floor is included, not the max. So obviously, if those dispensaries do well, there's some potential upside with the overall budget, but those are speculation at this point in time that would be difficult to make to justify anything higher than the minimum. So that's what's included. So Muni Services is the consulting firm that does most of our forecasting for sales tax, and they've got a really, really good pulse on what the state is seeing on a sales tax collection basis. So they provide 3 levels of forecasting: pessimistic, most likely, and optimistic. We generally have used most likely, and that's what we have consistently used over the past many years, and have found that to be the most accurate. Again, like we said, we're likely to see some a little bit of upside depending on where those revenues finish for the last 4 months of revenues that we'll see for fiscal year 17-18, and that's pretty telling for fiscal year 18-19 as well. So, as I mentioned, future growth, retail growth, a lot of folks want to talk about the Mitchell Ranch project, but for this fiscal year of 18-19, it's not likely for that Mitchell Ranch project to be up and running within the fiscal year. They do expect to break ground sometime late this fall, but they probably would not have a store open until fall of 2019. So there would likely be some increase for the next fiscal year, in fiscal year 19-20. So I'll pause there. Any questions on the revenue side of things?
On the development agreements. Sorry, on the development agreements. I know that we authorized you to sit down and renegotiate some things. Is that number reflected in this budget, or is it the minimum?
I can't recall. I think we still had the 480 in this draft, or did you adjust it to the 360?
Sorry, I pushed the wrong button. I did adjust it in this budget for the lower amount. Yes, I did.
360.
Thank
Right.
you.
So we are finalizing those arrangements with the Case Journey opportunity, which would be a little lower floor. There's a couple tweaks, still potential depending on what happens with their business. They may be able to go a little faster than that, but it would be about $120,000 difference.
Okay.
We've negotiated.
But
so
it's
far.
in the budget.
It's reflected there currently.
Thank you.
So, to go on that note, if what you said with Case Manufacturing, we get $50,000 a month for 5 months is what we're going to get, which would be July,
$775,000 for the year.
and then $70,000 from December.
75,000 from December the rest. So
That's right.
that's
what I got written down here. Sorry.
775, correct.
And I know on the previous budget, the council approved you to include just a portion of what they.
For Case
So now
Manufacturing,
we're-
you approved half last year.
Right.
because
So now we're
obviously
just
they weren't running.
we're including all of it.
Correct.
So
'Cause they
with
weren't
that,
when we approved the budget last year, they weren't operating yet.
Right.
We just approved the DA, and we were speculating as to when they were going to be operational.
okay, now just ponying off of that with the 2 retails that we have in place, I know county and city of Modesto are adopting their plan and stuff like that now. I'm not aware of, is there any county retail store facility that's in our sphere of influence right now?
No.
There's none? Do you know of any of them that are projected, let's say Crow's Landing, Carpenter Road, or anything like that?
Not in our sphere of influence, no.
Okay.
But there are very close to our boundaries. For example, one of the facilities that is being contemplated is on Whitmore, the north side of Whitmore, the old post plant. That is a facility that is being contemplated by Modesto.
Now, is that going to be manufacturing and
The concept there, from my understanding, is a full, what they call a complex, where it would have all aspects. So it may be a comprehensive site. It's a large site, but that has not been permitted as of yet.
And have you heard how the discussions are going with that? Anticipated?
My understanding, Modesto is still struggling from a staff perspective to get through the process.
So that would be City of Modesto, not county?
City of Modesto, correct.
Okay.
In this budget, just real quick, because it's a huge number, I believe, how much money will we prosper? The 8% is how much?
Well, so fiscal year, what's budgeted currently for fiscal year 18-19 is $1.7 million.
1.7 million.
Yeah. And that does not include the component that would be attributable to sales tax, which is, above that.
So if we have a 21% reserve, right, and say, what would the percentage of that 1.8 million be? I mean, if we were going to drop the reserves down to say 18%, or, do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I'm not following you.
That 1.8 million, how much money is that considered, for example, because we thought we were going to have an 18% budget, now all of a sudden we have all this extra money, and we have a 21% right now reserves because of other factors.
Right. Yeah.
I completely get it.
So 1% is 200,000-ish.
So you're looking at $600,000.
For the difference between 21% and 18 is 600,000, correct?
All right.
Now, when we're talking about sales tax on the cannabis, if we go to the sales tax on cannabis because of what's allowed, that means the development agreement of the 40,000 or whatever we have with them, that goes away and is replaced by a sale tax.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, if we were going to move that direction for the existing development agreements, we would eliminate the development agreement, or if it was found to be invalid, you would replace that with a tax rate.
Okay.
Again, we're not recommending that. We're recommending that as a backstop. We do feel that this mechanism that we're currently using is the most effective way to do it, but again, we've got to be cautious of what could happen or could change in the future. Okay, any other questions on the revenue, kind of big picture revenue side of things? And then we'll jump into the fun stuff, where we're spending the money. All right, so overview of expenditures for fiscal year 18-19. Again, this is draft, largely developed as status quo, i.e. status quo being in a very, very similar structure to what we've spent money on in fiscal year 17-18, and the items that we'll discuss and look for council direction is where those priorities may shift for fiscal year 18-19 versus where they are this year in fiscal year 17-18. So comparing the draft fiscal year 18-19 budget to where we're forecasted, so again, this is budget plus kind of 11 months of experience where we're forecasted to year end. These are kind of the big pieces of expenditure changes that we're seeing between those two. So forecasted 17-18 and draft budget 18-19 is what we're comparing here. So salaries, which is kind of an all-inclusive category, about $629,000. Of that, $270,000 is the fire overtime that we moved from Measure H to the general fund. So if you recall, previously over the last 4 or 5 years, all of fire overtime has been in Measure H. It proved to be too difficult to make that whole switch in 1 year, so we kind of split the difference and tried to do half this year. We'll try to do the remaining half next year. So $270,000 of that $629,000 is the fire overtime moving from Measure H back to the general fund. The retirement, again, these are Stan Sarah numbers broken out between the general employees and the public safety employees. You can see those increases. Those are actual numbers from Stan Sarah. This is a point to make here about Stan Sarah relative to PERS. I know this is a pretty active conversation about what those costs are going to be for most cities. This is one of the benefits of being in Stan Sarah, and the fact that it's locally controlled. The investments are being driven locally rather than at a statewide level. And for most of the cities, like Modesto, for example, they're going to see a pretty significant increase over the next couple of years as they move the discount rate from 7.5% down to 7%. For us, Stan Sarah has already implemented that change, and we're currently in the 3rd year of that implementation of reducing that discount rate. So in the grand scheme of things, our long-term costs are in a little better shape than a lot of our sister agencies that are PERS agencies. Workers' comp was actually kind of the first time in a long time we actually saw a decrease in workers' comp. And so that's done on a kind of a rolling average of your costs, and we generally see retrospective adjustments, which is basically, hey, you had a really bad year a couple years ago, now's your increase associated with those adjustments. So for this year, relative to where we're going to end 17-18, we're actually going to see a decrease, and of course that's spread across all of the departments. And lastly, the health insurance increase there of $237,000 would take us to the maximum negotiated cost allocation for the health insurance per the current MOUs. Any future increases in health insurance would be borne by the employees unless something was negotiated differently. So if you look to this next chart, which is something we've shown pretty consistently. If you look at the health insurance, the group insurance line there, you can see the future years after 18-19 stays consistent because, again, unless that were to be negotiated, the increased cost of health insurance would be completely borne by the employees.
Excuse me, Toby.
Yep.
When you're talking the overall salaries, okay, does that reflect what was proposed as far as classification changes, like as in code enforcement supervisor to just code enforcement officer? There was, I believe, one at Public Works. Does it include those changes with the projected for 18-19 budget?
Only those things are consistent. We'll cover each one of those going forward, but again, primarily status quo. From a budget, anything that was approved and forecasted in fiscal year 17-18 is included in there. There's only a couple minor adjustments.
So what's already in 17-18, that's what we went off
Correct.
with? No,
that's what we're comparing.
Okay, that's, okay.
There's a couple exceptions that I'll cover when we get into those departments.
All right.
Okay, so as the budget were to, if this draft budget, so the yellow column there is the fiscal year 18-19, again, a far cry from where we've been. We would look at revenues of 21.6, expenditures of 21.1, for a kind of a net positive of about 500,000, and would be adding to the fund balance and taking us to 22% as it stands today. But again, we've got to be careful of what's not included in there. A couple things to remember. One, this is not my recommended budget at this point. We need some council input before we can bring back a recommended budget. But a couple things that aren't in there. One, the negotiations. Obviously, a big component of the overall budget process is completing the negotiation with all the employee groups. The other piece is, the direction that we'll need. Also, the minimum fund balance. Council has previously indicated that's 18%. With where we're at today, is that still the case? So we'll kind of dive into that a little bit later if you need to, or we can discuss it now. And then a couple personnel position changes that we're recommending that we discussed kind of as we dig into it.
Question for you, going back to the slide before, is there any reason why you flatlined group insurance?
Because it's at max, because of the employee maximum, right? The negotiations dictate how much the city is paying, and we hit the cap this year based on those costs. So any increases are 100% borne by the employee groups unless something else was negotiated.
So if in negotiations that changes, that number goes up?
Like that, correct. Hence why the driver for increasing or getting the negotiation completed is obviously a significant driver for the overall budget process.
Ms. Dean?
Okay, it also can fluctuate based on the position that gets hired. So, for instance, we had a code enforcement office, our supervisor that retired, who had family coverage, and we replaced that with a code enforcement officer who does not have family coverage. So our costs would go down for him. But then we hired other people in other departments that had family coverage, where we had the previous year, we had just employee or employee plus one. So the number is technically at its negotiated max per employee, but depending on who's filling that position, that number can change.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on that? Okay, so the first piece of the expenditure, just kind of wanted to cover some kind of preliminary personnel to kind of get to your question, Mr. Klein, in terms of what we're looking for council direction on a couple personnel changes. So total full-time employees as prepared in the draft budget for fiscal year 18-19, 182. To put that in perspective, in 2006, 2007, we had 187.75 FTEs. So again, 5 less than we had 12 years ago. 2008, 2009 was our peak year in terms of employees at 202. Just to put that in context, most folks don't recognize this, but we are a really lean city in the grand scheme of things. Found some information today from 2016 on a statewide average of 479 cities. The general rule, or the average for those 479 cities was 101 residents per employee. At 182, ours would be 232. So double or half, whichever way you look at it, but in essence, half of the employees that the average city has across the 479 cities. Now, obviously, there's a lot of variation between what cities have and don't have, but just wanted to put that in perspective in terms of the number of employees that we have relative to most other cities. We are significantly lean from that perspective. as was mentioned, the code enforcement, so we made that change in the current fiscal year in 17-18. It will be reflected in the budget to change the code enforcement supervisor to the code enforcement officer, and that changes bargaining units. So it moved from the supervisor confidential position to the miscellaneous group. So that's one change there. We are recommending moving the recreation coordinator from a part-time position to a full-time position. We'll talk about that in a little more detail under the recreation budget. Under public safety for fire, 27 positions. Again, that's consistent. We'll talk about this in much more detail, but again, the SAFER grant ended. That's the change in that particular department. Overstaffing relative to the one long-term workers' comp case, as well as an overstaff for the FIU, and then which was frozen last year was a frozen captain and engineer, and then as council was aware, the two engineers that have left the organization in the last month that are currently vacant in the budget. It doesn't show in the personnel, but they're actually budgeted as firefighters currently. So the number will show you 3 firefighters, but what we've recognized is that savings already of those 2 positions, which is about a $75,000 savings. That is reflected in that draft budget as it's presented.
Toby, when you're talking about public safety fire, and you're talking 27, that is captains, engineers, and firefighters. It's not BCs, it's not a fire chief.
Correct.
Okay, so it's just those 3 positions.
Yeah, so this is listed by bargaining group.
Okay,
So,
all right.
yeah, I've gone through it as the bargaining groups, as the chart that's included in your budget document, went through it in that order. So, public safety police, again, this would be the POA 43 compared to last year, which 42. The only difference there currently would be the 4th SRO that was approved by council at the last meeting. No change for the sworn mid-manager, so this would be the battalion chiefs, the captain, and the police lieutenants. Supervisor confidential, again, this is the change, the code enforcement supervisor officer, and then a recommended change for this particular budget would be the water distribution supervisor, changing that to the public works superintendent. The person who was occupying that supervisor position has left, retired from the organization, and looking at our long-term needs within the water division, really feel the superintendent would be the better course of action for the long term with our change to surface water and all the needs that we're going to have on our water system. The superintendent, we feel, is the better role for that position, so we're recommending moving forward on that as soon as we possibly can to get that position filled to allow Jeremy to have some additional support at the higher level in the water division. Non-sworn manager, that particular one is that change again from public works superintendent. We also are recommending the elimination of the deputy public works director, assistant city engineer position due to a number of factors, and we'll cover that in a little more detail. And then the last piece of the department heads, no changes recommended there at this point in time. So what I've organized this structure a little bit differently than I've done in the past, where I've just gone kind of number order. Did them a little bit differently this year, and please stop me with any particular questions kind of on a department basis. So we started off with the 6 internal service funds. So the 6 there, the 2 for fleet, you have 1 for kind of the maintenance piece of it, this Department 600, 610 for the replacement. So maintenance and replacement, information technology, workers' compensation, building maintenance, and then the liability insurance. So those are the 6 internal service funds. Those again are spread across all the departments, so each department has a proportionate share of those costs as they're spread throughout the budget. Any questions on the internal service funds? Why are you laughing, Councilmember Klein?
Because you're looking right at me.
Well, you're laughing, so you caught my attention. All right, so no questions there. We'll move on to Department 16. So information technology, again, this is an internal service fund that's spread across all of the departments on a proportionate share. We've put some technology in place this year to get a little better tracking and accounting of those costs. We're getting some better information and numbers, and this continues to be a more and more accurate number. In the past, we've used some estimating that haven't turned out to be as accurate, but with the technology we're currently using, we are continuing to get better and better information in our service orders, how we're serving our internal customers, i.e. how IT is meeting the needs of all of the departments and tracking those costs on a more accurate basis. So that's something we are very, very happy with the results so far, and we'll continue to get better and better numbers as we move forward in the future. A couple ongoing projects, the telephone system replacement, we're hoping to have that wrapped up here in the next couple months. We had a couple little issues with AT&T. I know that's probably surprising, but we're almost done with that particular project. And, you know, the big picture, long-term for IT, you know, it's the same story we've kind of been talking about for a long time is, you know, replacement of equipment, making sure we're staying relevant with the existing technology and staying up with those threats for viruses and those type of things. But all in all, IT department is relatively stable with where we're at currently. Any questions, Department 16? All right. I know if you're following along in your binder, we'll bounce around a little bit. So, so on to Department 75. So that's the planning department. It's generally split between the general fund, water, and sewer. Really, the driver here is if we see a large spike in development activity. We haven't seen that yet. Obviously, very, very slow on the residential properties. Really only have one residential subdivision underway, and that's at KB Homes, Orchard Terrace. Did stop in and talk to the sales person there about a week ago and indicated in their first 3 weeks they sold 6 homes. So that's very encouraging. Price points are a little higher than I would expected, about $337 to $350 for the prices out there, but it's encouraging to see activity out there. But from the planning department, again, relatively stable in the grand scheme of things. Any questions on the planning department budget?
In the planning, doesn't the developer basically pay a fee to help offset those costs?
It does offset some of those costs, right? It doesn't offset all the costs.
When you say some of it, give me a percentage.
I don't have a percentage. I'd have to do a little more research. Tom, do you have any color for that?
Probably about anywhere from 5 to 10%.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay.
Because the other aspects, you know, general customers, general people, I mean, developers are paying for development processing of projects, but they're not paying for people coming to the counter asking about setbacks and all of those issues. Those are
Okay.
general fund activities.
Well, with that, we just approved the thing for those other engineers and stuff. Does that come into play with any of this planning?
No.
Okay.
Those retainer engineers are primarily delivering capital improvement projects.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions on the planning department? All right. Other things under community development would be the housing and building. So housing this year, that same project that I just mentioned, Orchard Terrace, as council may recall, a couple of years ago, that project came back in as it was kind of getting back to life, requested a change in a condition of approval that was put in place several years ago that had a requirement for a low-income housing component of that project, and the council adopted basically an in-lieu fee of $2,000 a unit that would be dedicated to housing. So now that project is moving forward, we'll be collecting that fee, and we've allocated the revenue of $50,000 with a corresponding expenditure under contract services in Department 57 for housing-related activities. Then Department 70 would be the building department. Again, relatively status quo. The only challenge really from that is an increase in building activity, which we hope to see some significant, or that little project that I mentioned before with the Mitchell Ranch, we hope to see breaking ground and begin construction this fiscal year. Questions on housing or building? All right. Moving on, the finance department. Again, primarily split equally between the three, between general fund, water, and sewer. You know, the challenge is similar to the rest of the city of staff retention and succession planning. Ms. Dean is at some point in the future going to retire and currently don't have any succession planning in place. Deputy director position would be much needed in that department. However, in light of all the other priorities, I'll look for council direction kind of in comprehension of the overall process. But questions?
If the election if it changes for the city treasurer, and we discussed that in November, could that conceivably be put with either the finance director, who then will be busier, and then look at a deputy director position then?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, again, it wouldn't come into play until fiscal year 1920, but that would be once we got direction from the voters in November of 2018, we'd have plenty of time to make that consideration as to what we want to do for fiscal year 1920.
And she can't retire until after that, okay.
I'll let you hold her accountable for that one.
Ms. Dean?
I'm already performing the major functions of the treasurer, and because of the investment portion of the treasurer's duties that I'm doing, I wouldn't recommend putting it at a lower level staff member. I would
Oh, no,
keep
no,
it
no,
with
I
the finance
didn't
director.
mean that.
Oh,
If
okay.
you were going to be tasked with the city treasurer, then maybe you would need even more someone to help you.
I already do need that, yes. But I am already doing the treasurer, and I am still doing all the duties of the deputy director, which includes the community foundation and all of the compliance reporting. I am trying to teach the accountants as time allows, just so there's someone else in the department who knows how to do it.
How much would that position be for a deputy director?
I haven't costed it for a couple of years, so I don't have a number right now.
If I remember correctly, the general fund component was 75-ish?
That wouldn't be the split between the three
That would
sources
be the
of
three.
income?
It could be a little high, maybe closer to 60. I'm thinking fully burdened was about 180-ish. Fully burdened meaning all-in costs. Obviously depends on what level. If you're hiring a Step A employee versus a Step E employee, there's obviously a pretty significant range there, but plus minus $60,000 to $70,000 of general fund impact.
I think that's an area that's pretty important. I don't know if that's something we need to talk about later, but I'd like to put a star on that.
Yeah, I mean, as we kind of move through this, I mean,
Yeah,
I
put a
think
star on
in
it and come
context,
back
at
to
the
it.
end, well, at the end, that's where I'm summarizing all
Okay,
of those needs.
okay.
So that's where we're looking for the overall direction. And again, that's kind of relative priorities in the grand scheme of things, right? That's the fun part for the council, is making the policy decision of which priorities are the highest. All right, so that's finance. Any other questions on the finance department? All right, moving on to HR and risk management. Again, the allocation is a little bit different here, 50% to general fund and 25% to sewer and water. Ongoing investigations, and one of the key aspects is handling the negotiations, and then any potential new investigations. And as I mentioned before, a couple lawsuits that we've been involved in, HR is handling the point process of that with those outstanding lawsuits. And I think I may have failed to mention that in that overall number, what's included in the overall budget today are the two settlements that we've reached numbers on. One has been settled completely. One is we've reached an agreement on a number. There's two outstanding. The outstanding two cases are not included in the current draft budget. We don't have numbers yet to reflect those. So any other questions on HR? All right, moving on to the city clerk. Again, this spread is general fund, water, sewer, CRA being the former redevelopment agency, and then the SCRC. This year, really, the only change there is the election cost. Got a break by moving from from odd years to even years. So that pushed out that cost from 17 to 18. So it's really the only primary changes related to the election costs.
So when is anticipated the redevelopment agreement's going to go away? What's the anticipated?
They currently haven't given us, as of right now, they've approved our administrative costs for those two districts. And what's changing this year is it's moving from having an oversight board at our local level, it's moving to one countywide oversight board. But there currently is not a date of when those would expire, other than when our bonds are paid off, which is not until 2036, is that right? 2033? 2036? So as of right now, we're expected to continue to have those administrative fees.
Up through 2033?
Yeah, I mean, it would take legislation to undo that. So it's covered, at least for the foreseeable future. We don't anticipate that changing without some legislation at the state level. I would suspect, depending on who the governor is, that may get revisited, but yeah, that's just a question mark that we don't have an answer for.
Okay.
Any other questions on the city clerk? All right, city council department, again, pretty straightforward. There are no changes in those numbers, how those are split between the general fund, water, and sewer. City manager, the same, no change. Obviously split the similar direction between the city clerk. The finance director is split a similar way. Any questions on city council or city manager departments? All right, moving on to the general city. So this is really, there's no personnel costs in here. This handles a couple of those bigger contracts with our legal contract. StanCog, League of California Cities, LAFCO, Westport Fire, which is part of the West Landing Specific Plan annexation. So per council direction last year, the TRIP, Tuolumne Regional River Park, we did not include the $17,000 and change in last year's budget. In meeting with TRIP and discussing the concept with them, the legal costs of us formally exiting that organization will cost $50,000 to $60,000, so it really didn't make sense to go spend $50,000 or $60,000 to save 17. So my recommendation would be to not participate again financially, but to see if we can modify the JPA so that we're a non-voting member, still participate at a staff level, but save ourselves the cost of formally exiting that organization, because there's land that is owned between the three entities, which would be the City of Ceres, City of Modesto, and Stanislaus County. That would be my recommendation at this point, but I look for council direction on whether, one, you want to continue to participate or renew participating, which again would be another $17,000, or leave it status quo, and we can discuss that at a future time.
And Westport Fire is because of the annexation?
A West Landing Specific Plan, correct.
Right, okay.
Yep. And then the last item there is the TOT discussion that we mentioned, discussed previously. That's currently not in the draft budget, so we look for council direction on that item. I'm assuming you approve the concept of the TOT program, that you would like to see the $20,000 included in the draft budget.
Yes.
Yes. Head shake. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Any other questions on the city manager on TRIP? I assume status quo on TRIP, or?
Yes, because when we had the presentation a couple meetings ago, if you listen to the presentation, I didn't hear anything that was benefiting any of our property in the city of Ceres. Everything was west of the freeway, it was wherever it was, but it was nothing that was within our boundaries. I didn't see any, I don't see any reason that we need to continue paying them or start paying them again.
Just leave it status quo.
Not participate financially. Councilmember, Mayor?
Doesn't matter what I think.
Well, it does matter, but Councilmember Klein?
I agree.
And when you say staff, would that be, do we have staff that would continue to go to the meetings?
Currently, the staff member who is attending those meetings would be, we'll discuss that a little bit.
Okay.
And don't we have a citizen that's appointed to that?
Correct.
Okay.
We have one currently appointed, we do have one vacancy.
Right.
All right, any questions on General City? All right, moving on to the Public Works Department. So again, multiple departments here under Public Works. You've got departments 18, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and 41. So 18 is Public Works Administration. Department 20 is the two fleet components. Again, mostly status quo, really no changes across those departments. Any questions on those first two, departments 18 or 20? All right, moving on to other Public Works departments, to the sewer service. Again, pretty status quo, a little more focused this year on some capital improvement projects to continue to build some infrastructure there. The streets department, Department 30, primarily is funded by gas tax. There's really, as it stands today, there's no general fund money allocated towards streets and roads. And again, we're continuing as per the draft budget to suspend the street tree grid pruning. That's about $125,000 a year to get back onto that program, but obviously with other priorities that fell off a couple years ago. So currently, this is only funding for emergency funding for the tree work. One concept that we've kind of contemplated, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail in code enforcement, is potentially funding a streets position, at least 50% general fund, and potentially another funding source from our AB 939, which is some recycling and waste dollars to be able to try and help code enforcement with the removal of some of these blight and illegal jumps and those type of things. So that's a concept I wanted to talk about, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in code enforcement just to kind of start the thought process, and then we'll follow up in code enforcement where council's overall priorities are with code enforcement and whether a position like that council feels would be helpful or if you need some more information on it. So any questions on Department 25 or 30? All right, Department 35, the water service. This is the one position change that we're asking to move forward on. An ideal world, we'd love to move forward on it tomorrow or yesterday, would be changing the water supervisor to a water superintendent. The job description is mostly written. We'd like to bring that back to council for finalization at the next meeting on June 11th and start that recruitment with the idea that it would try to get that person on board as soon as we possibly can. We see that being critical with our long-term water needs relative to surface water, our treatment order that we have on TCP, other challenges we have in the water system. That position is really critical to continue to move forward. So any questions or thoughts on moving forward on that?
You're not going to come back in 4 months and say we need a supervisor?
At this point, we feel the superintendent is a better structure for
No,
the
what I
water
mean
division.
is if we say
Need 'em
let's
both?
hire
Well,
the
we'd
public
be-
works superintendent to replace the supervisor, you're not going to come back and say, oh, we need a supervisor as well, because the public works superintendent's supposed to be doing that, correct?
That's the idea, correct.
Okay.
Thoughts, questions? Getting blank stares.
Question?
Comfortable with us moving forward with that sooner rather
Yes.
than later?
I am.
See head nods. All right. The water conservation, again, we created this in 2015-16 to create a separate funding source for the water conservation efforts, so really no change there in the grand scheme of things for Department 36. Okay, moving on to, now we're starting to get into the fun stuff where council needs to start considering the relative priorities of things. So Parks and Grounds, Department 40, third largest department behind police and fire. This is the department really that was division most impacted by the recession. So for context, 2006, 2007, that fiscal year, there were 11 and a half FTEs. The department was a little different then because it was prior to the community center and it was parks, grounds, and facilities. But just for relative perspective, you had 11 and a half positions. Today, in the current draft budget, we have 4 positions, a supervisor and 3 maintenance workers, and we've operated most of this past year with 3 due to some long-term issues that we were working with in that department. In addition, we lost the mowing contract due to some non-performance issues. So obviously, everyone knows this, and the community has expressed their concerns about park maintenance. So what's included in the draft budget right now is $50,000 for temp staffing to basically an immediate need and the ability to turn the dial pretty quickly to get some additional staff support to help get the mowing up to speed and get more work in the parks. Our recommendation, so again, the draft includes $50,000. Our recommendation would be to up that by another $100,000 to have $150,000 for temp staffing. That allows us to get those bodies here immediately, get that improvement in place immediately. Then we would be able to complete negotiations, come back probably at a mid-year and be able to look a longer-term solution where we'd like to be able to hire 2 full-time positions there in parks to be able to move back in the direction of having enough staff to maintain our parks appropriately. But the temp staffing we feel is the quickest way to get to see some improvements within our parks in immediate fashion.
But mowing isn't the only problem we have in our parks. So if you're going to increase the
We need
mowing.
more bodies, right? I mean, the idea of $150,000 is more bodies to do park maintenance. And obviously, one component of that is mowing, but recognize we've got 3 existing staff who are very well versed in our park systems. If we had temporary staff to be on mowers, those other 3 could be focused on other issues like sprinklers and maintenance and maintaining, we've got 150 acres of parks, 13, across 13 parks. I mean, this is obviously a need that we have within the community, and we feel that's the most effective and efficient way to move quickly to make a difference.
So the 150 acres of parks, how many hours does that take to mow a week?
Idea of that?
Okay.
That's with nothing going wrong and no issues in a park, no people to run off or.
Well, wouldn't we get more bang for our buck if we hired a parks person instead of doing a temporary
Just
mowing
takes a
person?
process, right? for us to get a
And
person.
then when it's raining and they're not going to mow, we can have them do something else because they're a
We can do that
regular
We
employee.
can do that with a temporary employee as well. The
They're
challenge
going to
is
be
that
temporary. They're not going to be vested, are they, in our,
it's just a short-term time frame, because in order for us to hire a permanent process, we have to go through a recruitment process, and we're talking 2 months to get that person on board versus getting them here.
or if you have someone that we've just let go because they weren't doing a good job mowing, you can have the same issue with the temporary person that you're talking about getting here immediately.
Yeah, but the temp person you can replace on a daily basis if you need to. It's a lot easier to deal with a temp employee in a short-term situation than it is in a longer-term position where we're talking about progressive discipline and all the other factors we need to do. Obviously, if someone on probation is a little different, but we just see this as the immediate need versus the long-term need. Long-term need is we obviously need.
Well, but it seems like we're so far behind the curve. I mean, it's been since the great layoff of 2009.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's been that long.
Absolutely.
That when you look at the other staffing in public works, you have facilities, you have 5 custodians, 1 maintenance, 1 supervisor. You have streets, 1 supervisor, 9 employees. Wastewater treatment plant, 1 supervisor, 9 employees. Water, you have 7 employees. And then you get to parks, and you have 1 supervisor and 3 employees for 150 acres. To me, we need to hire at least 1 person now and forget about the temporary. That's my own personal feeling.
So
I don't
next,
think one's enough. One's not enough.
The
If
question
you're going to
is-
say one, it's really 2 and some temporary, or 1. Again, I think temporary is the better solution in the short term, but if you want to
$82,000 to hire a full-time person.
Sorry?
$82,000 to hire a full-time person.
Depending on what level, correct.
so that's less than 0.5% of our general fund, you know, because you were talking 200,000 is 1%.
Correct.
So you're looking at less than 0.5%. The other question is it fully funded by the general fund, or is it spread out between water?
General fund.
It's all
100%.
general fund?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you know, I don't think it's enough, honestly.
Never is.
You know, I mean, we were at 11, and I know there's some other things in there, but, you know, looking at our parks and what our statement reads in our community, I think it's real important to have parks maintained in a proper way. You know, now we got weeds growing all through the sidewalks, and because the guys can't get to them. I understand, we only got three people, and, you know, I don't see how they get half of what they get done, but, you know, I've had conversation with Jeremy, and I think, you know, if we're going to look at this realistically, we need to look at the real number, where we're at right now. You know, whether we adopt that or not, but, you know, I think Mayor Vieira and I both had that conversation with Jeremy, and it was $220,000, I think, was the number. And, you know, I don't know what that's going to look like in a budget, but I think that's for us to decide. We need to do something. I mean, them parks are a mess. It's embarrassing, absolutely embarrassing. And it's nothing reflecting on our guys at all. They're doing everything they can do. They need some help. So, you know, that's kind of what I feel about it. I think it's important. I think it's as important as police and fire, honestly. You know, parks are part of this community. It's part of things we service, and we're not doing a very good job with that. And it's going to take more bodies. So that's just my 2 cents for now. We can take it on down the road later.
What I think we're hearing here is that the council wants to increase the staffing in the parks and grounds area. So whether that's 1, 2, or however many people to get the job done adequately, then I think that's what we want.
Hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
All right, moving on to Department 41, Facility Service. Again, this is primarily an internal service fund. It's allocation across the city for the internal service fund for facilities. Any questions on that item, Department 41? All right, moving into kind of this CDRAP, so Series Revitalization Downtown, basically the governed by Planning Commission has the oversight, but ultimately it's council consideration. Again, this is not general fund. This is funded by a small tax on the downtown business owners. Budget's essentially unchanged. The Planning Commission met on this in May and recommended one change this year, which was an allocation of about $10,000 for security. The concept there would be utilizing our existing contract with Ontel. They patrol our parks after hours and do some of that surveillance. Adding 2 stops a night to that in the downtown, they would do some additional, would cost us about $10,000 under our existing contract. Provide, the downtown business owners a little extra security as we continue to work with them. The challenge long term is there's not enough revenue to support that on an annual basis. Right now, it has about $80,000 as a fund balance for that. But as was discussed earlier tonight, the maintenance for the downtown for 4th Street will be, much greater than what it is today because of the improvements we've made. So ultimately, either the general fund or some combination of CDRAB and the general fund would have to take on those costs. So the security is recommended for a 1 year, but we do not anticipate having additional funding for that in the future. In the meantime, we would work with the business owners and try to get them to make some investment in cameras or other activities that provide some security, but this would be kind of a 1 year shot to assist them as we kind of move forward with helping our downtown. So that's what's currently in the draft, is that allocation of $10,000 for security outreach to the downtown.
And that's paid for by the downtown merchants?
Correct.
Okay.
Funded out of that program. So it's got a year or two of that before, again, a year from now, what we anticipate in fiscal year 18-19 is going out to bid for landscape maintenance services for the downtown separating that out from, the Howard Training Center contract, which handles a lot more than just the downtown, contracting for that specifically. So there is a direct connection with the folks maintaining downtown, which our expectation is to a higher level than what we get at some of our other facilities, and then having a hard number for next year's budget conversation, and that would set the longer term perspective of what the revenue is relative to those expenses.
When CDRAB or the Planning Commission had this discussion, were the downtown merchants invited to the meeting?
They were invited. Only a couple did attend, which is unfortunately consistent with those type of events.
And the couple that attended, were they in agreement with that, or did they object?
Yeah, no, they liked the concept.
Okay.
Okay, the other two, Department 5859, again, are primarily the redevelopment agency, successor agency to those two items. No real change there. Any questions on those two items, or those 3 departments? All right, Department 19, engineering. Again, this is spread across a number of departments. Very little general fund impact, but a lot of impact on the capital project, water, sewer, gas tax, transit. AB 939 is the funding source I mentioned as a potential for the code enforcement offset with streets. Measure L, which is the half-cent sales tax for transportation. SB 1, which most folks will get to vote on in November relative to that funding source of the increase the gas tax. Those are projects that are being delivered by the engineering department. Reference there, the relationship department 95, so that's capital improvements. 2 projects that are incorporated in the general fund would be the citywide speed study. That's necessary so that we can actually do radar enforcement. We need to get that done as soon as possible. And then secondly, the citywide security improvements. So that's in essence the upgrade to our badge concept, as well as some cameras across the full campus of City Hall, as well as our remote sites. And $15,000 with the general fund's share, and it's spread across multiple sites for the public facilities fees for public works, water, sewer, and other IT functions.
So when you're talking about citywide speed study, does that include the area north of Hatch Road, which is a Modesto zip codes?
City limits, everything within the city limits, that area is serious city limits. Yeah.
I just want to clarify.
All streets that we have jurisdiction over have to, if it's not a pure residential street, so a pure residential street is 25 miles an hour, you don't have to do a speed survey on that street. But any other street that has a posted speed limit, that speed survey basically is the verification that that posted speed limit is correct.
And that helps us when someone fights a ticket, is that what it is?
Correct, yeah. We have to have that in place for it to be a legally valid street limit, and they're only good for 5 years. So, and the other change in the engineering services, as I mentioned, in the personnel piece, the current position of the Deputy Director of Public Works and Assistant City Engineer. With the most recent change of hiring, the SRWA hired a general manager, which took about 25 to 30 hours of that particular individual's work responsibilities. We are recommending with the timing to eliminate that position. The engineering department would likely restructure going forward to kind of move more folks into the delivery of projects. As I mentioned, they've got a real heavy workload in terms of Measure L, SB1, and all those other projects, and the need for project folks versus administrative folks is really where the driver is. So any questions on Department 19 or 95? All right, Department 55, Recreation. So one of the changes was a move of the janitorial contract from Department 275, which is the community center account. It's kind of a separate one-off account that covers that completely. Moving those costs, $128,000 from that specific account to the general fund to move ourselves away from that separate accounting to putting those two together. So ultimately, our goal would be next year to be able to combine the community center 275 account with the general fund, and it would just be one account for the recreation department rather than two separate. So this is the first step in that process to move in that direction. Key for operating this facility, as well as all of the things that the recreation department does, from my perspective as a city manager, absolutely critical to move forward on the replacement of a recreation manager. As council knows, Tracy left a couple weeks ago. That need is dire. When someone who's worked for our city for 15 plus years, she takes a lot of institutional knowledge with her, and just the pure 40 plus hours a week that she worked, we've got to replace that somehow. And it's more than 40 hours because somebody new coming in is going to be learning a job, and they're not going to have the efficiency and effectiveness that she had after 15 years of work. So absolute critical need to get that replaced as soon as possible. My recommendation would be to start that recruitment tomorrow, if at all possible. Obviously, it's going to take us a month and a half to recruit that position, but really need to get that moving forward as quickly as possible. The rec coordinator position currently is budgeted as a part-time position. When we created that position, created the position after we promoted Tracy to the rec manager with the idea that it would move to a full-time position. Unfortunately, our budget constraints and restrictions over the past 4 years, we were not able to do that. But with Tracy leaving, this is the perfect opportunity to make sure we've got somebody who's already here with a couple years experience that can help to offset that loss that we just had with losing Tracy with a pretty minor cost. In the grand scheme of things, it's about $25,000 to be able to move that from a part-time to a full-time position to help continue the operation of this community center and the activities that the recreation department carries out.
For the rec manager, I know previously we had tried having someone as the, in another department as the rec manager, who is smiling about it because it was so much fun. But is there any department that would have somebody on staff that could oversee 2 full-time rec coordinators and be kind of a rec manager?
Having gone through that process, and when I became city manager and knowing Captain Collins and the process that he was going through and the difficulties of that, for it to be effective, and as I mentioned earlier, with the leanness of staff, where we're at, I don't see any department having the capacity to effectively run that department. It's clearly a need. It's been a need for a long time. As when you put Parks and Rec together, it's clearly the 3rd largest activity in the city. And if you ask any citizen, what are the 3 priorities? It's depending on the day of the week and what their issues are. It's police, fire, and Parks and Rec. Depending on the day, one of those may be higher, but that's in order to carry out the function that we built this building for, to run all the programs we do in this city, from aquatics to Tiny Tots baseball. All of those things are we need that position.
Parks and Rec, you said it right there. It could be Mr. Damas, right?
He's got his hands full with about 7 other departments that he's
okay.
responsible for.
So it looks like we probably need to recruit to fill Tracy's position.
That would be my
Well,
strong recommendation.
You know, we've had these conversations, and, you know, I'm a physical education teacher, so I think Parks and Recreation is very important. I just see this building, and again, having come on board in the council in 2007-8, and we're losing lots of money each year because of this building. Correct? I mean, it's not, we're losing, but we owe money because we use this facility.
Correct.
And part of my thought process is because when we had the conversation, and again, you know, I appreciate you being, you know, very open in regards to how your thoughts are and stuff. I just had seen, you know, Cambria and Tracy, I'm sure they both work really hard, as, you know, all of our city employees do. And then to have the conversation that you wanted to add another person on top of hiring for somebody, when I'm sitting there thinking, well, maybe we need to try to restructure some of this a little bit. Is it possible to have a part-time person because you realistically think right now is the busy time. Really, right now, what we have in the city series. And then if you go, you know, and again, the aquatics thing has kind of changed a little bit because we have lost the dolphins and there's some other things that are going on.
Aquatics would be the first to go, right? Because Tracy ran that program, and if you're not going to allow me to fill a recreation manager, it's not a budget savings, it's a reduction in programs. We cannot carry out the same level of programming with less bodies. It's that simple. So if you want me to return with which programs we would eliminate, I mean, you're talking about programs that Tracy had a tremendous stake in, like Christmas Tree Lane, Halloween Festival, the aquatics program, on and down the list. It's not possible to carry out all that same programming with one less body.
And the reason why I say this is because I think you hit it on the head, police, fire, and then Parks and Rec. You know, I'm looking at, we're pretty thin in regards to our public safety. And I'm just saying to look at it in regards to the fact of, is it possible to get by through this short period of time? And I don't know, maybe you have somebody in mind, but rather than recruiting for somebody, you know, and we're going to put the recruit out, what if we didn't find anybody? I mean, so.
I'm 100% confident we can find somebody. Absolutely. I've already done the research. I've talked to other folks in the industry, and there are folks up and coming. We would actually be attractive for that position because there's not a lot of opportunity at that recreation manager position. I'm very confident that we could find somebody to fit that role. And if you're asking me to choose the choice between a rec manager and making the rec coordinator full-time, that's a no-brainer. The rec manager is far more important than making the rec coordinator full-time.
And that would cost about, what, $21,000?
$25,000.
$25,000.
I mean, the rec manager is a budgeted position, right? There's no change. There's actually likely a savings because Tracy was a Step E employee, and depending on, you know, what
is the budget on the rec manager? How much?
Fully burdened?
Fully burdened.
160-ish? See how good my guess is. Suzanne's looking it up for us.
I have it in the budget budgeted with family coverage at step C, and it's 145.
And while you have that, Suzanne, how much would it be to increase the rec coordinator from half to full-time?
I did that calculation, and I have her in the budget right now as full-time. We pay her on a part-time basis roughly $30,000 because of all the hours that she worked, and I have it.
So the budget that we're looking at tonight
reflects
shows
her
her
position
as
full-time.
Full-time.
Correct.
Yes, it does.
And it shows the recreation manager being filled.
As a Step C employee.
And
correct.
we're at 22%.
Correct.
With those, okay.
Yeah, and the rec coordinator position, fully burdened, is $48,000.
For full-time.
For full-time
So that would
with
be an
benefits.
increase of about 24,000.
Roughly, yeah.
Okay. But it's in the budget.
It is in the budget as full-time. I also have not reduced the temporary staffing, so there is potentially a savings there. When Tracy was putting together the budget, she thought there might be a need for some additional part-time staff, so she left that in the budget. But if we do make this position full-time, there's potential of reducing the part-time staffing by at least $22,000.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just had one question, and I don't really mean to do this, Mr. Collins, to put you on the spot, but I know you have some experience in this area, and I wanted to see if I could get your input on the oversight of the Parks and Recreation and how I mean, I don't want you to put yourself at odds with what's being presented here, but wanted to get your opinion
I wouldn't recommend it.
of hiring an additional person?
No, to hire an additional person, I would recommend that. To have another person from a different department to come in and oversee the program, I would not recommend that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions on this?
Anything else on recreation? And we'll circle back to all of these, and we'll look for some priority rankings. So moving on to Department 11, so this is animal control. So animal control is a JPA consisting of 6 other cities. Currently, the budget for animal control is not approved, so what's plugged into the budget is a placeholder at $350,000, which is a slight increase over last year's $335,000. I'm meeting with the representatives from SASA on Thursday to get kind of the updated budget. We've been arguing back and forth with the way Modesto's budget is. We're not quite sure where this budget's going to end up, but likely there'll be a little bit of an increase there. I just don't have a magnitude yet, but it'll most likely be something above the $350,000 that's currently budgeted. Just don't know what that range is. I would assume worst case is probably about a $50,000 increase. Likely is probably about a $20,000 increase. Grand scheme of things, it's consistent with what we've seen over the past 5 years, just a little bit higher. Last year was somewhat of the low point for the animal services, and what we get billed on is based on our animal intake, right? So the more animals that are being picked up within our jurisdiction, the more our proportionate costs go up. So that's one of the challenges on that JPA, how those costs are getting spread. And the way it works is Modesto being the big fish, Stanislaus County as well, we're kind of third in that line, and we get to see a pretty significant share of those costs, about 11% of the cost of the animal services. A couple things have changed recently in animal services. They used to be able to use inmates to do the kennel cleaning, and that program has gone away. So they have to shift to paid employees doing the animal kennel cleaning. Boy, I say that a few times fast. And so that's shifted some folks who are out doing canvassing, which is going door to door and checking up on pet licenses, is where we generate revenue. So we're able to cite those folks who don't have a license. So when you have to pull those canvassers off the street and put them in the kennel, you're losing revenue plus increasing cost. So those are the kind of challenges we're seeing on the animal services side of things. So next, there below is the code enforcement. So as we exist today, as I mentioned, the change last year, we changed from a code enforcement supervisor position to a code enforcement officer. Officer has been in place working for a little over 3 months now. He's doing a fantastic job, but total funding, I would call code enforcement basically 2 full-time equivalents currently. So 1 code enforcement officer, part-time in department, 13 with the office support, and then part-time sergeant in terms of his time committed to it. So right now, code enforcement is effectively 2 full-time equivalents. Obviously, this is something the council has mentioned the need for an additional code enforcement officer. Clearly, something we need. It's a priority. Where that fits in the overall priorities of everything else we've spoken about this evening. That's why I'll look for council direction. And for consideration will be the difference between a code enforcement officer and say that street worker to kind of help on the cleanup side of things. So there's a balance there of, you know, how many code enforcement officers do you need relative to that help, administrative staff, supervisory, you know, with the sergeant overseeing that. So look for your kind of consideration and thoughts on that matter.
Is there anything that VIPS can do as far as code enforcement, administrative things?
They generally do, as other folks that are sitting on the dais have recently experienced, garbage cans and other things of that nature. The VIPS is handling some of those activities. So they do help with that, but it still generally needs code enforcement help on those items. So they do help, but it's never enough. I mean, code enforcement is, for a city of 47,000, you know, generally we would need, you know, 4 full-time equivalents would be my, you know, off the cuff based on what most people are staffed for code enforcement. A supervisor, 2 code enforcement officers, and a support staff would be.
How much could VIPS do? I thought that code enforcement had
pretty
to
limited.
be.
I mean, they're pretty limited. Yeah,
They had to have certain licenses and everything else, and certified.
They can keep this. They can do the simple stuff, but to get into citing people, you've got to have a code enforcement officer do that. You can do warnings and that type of thing, and you know, more education is really their focus, is trying to educate what the code says. And really focusing on those simpler things, right? Abandoned vehicles, those type of things. So thoughts on code enforcement officer versus street support? Thoughts on that?
I think we need additional staff.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah. And the street support, I think that's a good idea too. I mean, obviously, that's gonna be a lot less hit to the general fund.
Smaller number in the grand scheme of things.
Smaller number. But, you know, I mean, you can't have code enforcement guys out there, you know, doing their job and then trying to, you know, pick up all the crap too. So, I mean, I can see where they can both work together.
Yeah, we've seen the
pretty well.
challenges with that too. Code enforcement trying to pick up and move things that
Right.
they shouldn't be, which just leads to injuries and other things. So,
Yeah.
having, you know, truck and equipment that can handle those things is a better approach. Obviously, anytime we can coordinate those activities with Bertolotti on bulky item pickups and those other things, we try to do that as best we can. But, you know, sometimes those situations we need to address immediately. And the streets department helps with that currently, you know, and coordinates through their current workload. But obviously, if you had someone who was focused on that activity, it would be a little more efficient and effective in the grand scheme of things. So, I mean, we've showed this illustration before of code enforcement being kind of this hub to a spoked wheel of how it affects so many departments, right? I mean, on code enforcement, you're impacting planning and public works and the police department, even the fire department. I mean, they're all interconnected here. So if we have more folks, you know, as part of that team, you know, we can be more effective.
What's the cost?
So fully burdened code enforcement, what was that number? Was it 100-ish?
97,000.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's at C-step, right? Yeah, C-step fully burdened.
And then I know at the very end, we'll have this conversation, how low are we willing to go? And again, if we didn't have the cannabis, we wouldn't have any of these conversations, because we would have nothing, zero.
Correct.
So,
All right, any questions on Department 11 or 13? All right, so Department 9, so this is PD non-sworn, so primarily dispatch and records. In essence, flat year over year here, really no changes in that department. You know, this continues to be one of the more challenging recruitments. I would say the police officers is the most challenged recruitment, but dispatchers is a close second. Ask our neighbors down in Turlock, their challenges recruiting dispatchers is really significant, and you know, I tip my hat to our chief and his staff of retaining and keeping folks, as it is a really, really difficult world out there on retaining and attracting dispatchers. This is something that is a huge challenge across the valley, and I mean, there's just a huge need for it. So one of the things that we got to keep an eye on and continue to try to keep reserves in place, so if we do lose somebody, we're able to put somebody in place, because it's a significant time frame for getting somebody trained up and running in the dispatch field. But for the current fiscal year, no changes proposed currently. Questions on Department 9? On to Department 10, so the police department, obviously the largest city department, as I mentioned, the priorities, you know, our priorities are where we spend our money, and at the grand scheme of things, the police department is well over 50% of our general fund expenditures. It's clearly our largest priority. Some folks would say it's not a big enough priority, but clearly it's our number one priority based on the number of money what amount of money we spend on the police department. Obviously, we all would love to have more officers, but at the same time, we've got this bigger picture budgetary balance, and we'll look for your direction as we wrap up here. Here's where we're at currently. What's budgeted currently 18-19, the only change position-wise is the 4th SRO. Again, that's 85% funded by the school district. There's the list of the 9 sergeants, 29 patrol officers and detectives, 1 traffic officers. Currently have 3 vacancies that we're recruiting for, and as I mentioned, recruiting for the police officers is tremendously difficult here in the valley. Most of the folks who are going through the academy are being sponsored. We did approve that process to have a recruit. However, getting academy space and getting someone through that process is a challenge as well. We currently, those 3 vacancies, we've had applications out for about 3 weeks, I believe, and we've had 7 applicants in 3 weeks, which is very discouraging, and those applicants aren't nothing to write home about. So those challenges are continuing. If council were to authorize some more positions or, unfreezing some of the PD positions, our recruitment process would be difficult to fill in the short term. It will take us some time with those 3 vacancies and potentially a couple more longer term as we look at the succession planning of our organization on the police department. So that's the overall police department. Obviously, I know there's desire from council as well as the citizens to having additional staffing. I'll look for council direction or thoughts.
I have a question. Is it realistic to budget overtime at $415,000 when we're projecting this year we're going to end at $557,000?
A lot of that's a function of injuries. The previous year we were pretty close. We hit just over, I think we hit like 425 in the previous year. This year we had several IODs, injured on duty, which really affected that overtime number. That's the hard part of a 24/7 operation. When you've got that many bodies, it only takes a couple injuries, a couple babies. All those factors come into play to affect your overtime budget. So it was accurate for 1 year. Is it accurate every year? Probably not. I think our overtime budget has fluctuated over the past 5 or 7 years pretty significantly. Obviously, tip my hat to Chief Smith and what he's done, staffing and controlling that to his best ability and keeping that number relatively low and close to budget. This year is that anomaly where you get a couple work injuries that really impact your overtime budget.
Well, last year I brought up bringing back the street crimes unit, and I didn't receive any support.
It's always a different year.
I know and I'm going to bring it up again. And my reasoning is this year, and I'm not going to mention any names of establishments or any names of the particular gang, but I've heard a rumor that there is a biker gang that has gone to a local bar, and while they were there, they announced that it was their bar. I don't want to mention, and again, it's maybe just a rumor that's floating around out there, but I'm not going to mention the bar's name or the biker gang's name.
Well, I would say the rumor, they were there, they were present, so it's not a rumor. That they're not making it their bar. They are trying to establish themselves in Stanislaus County.
And in Ceres, because they already have a clubhouse in Ceres.
They have a clubhouse in Modesto.
Well, the one I'm talking about has a meeting place. Maybe it's not a clubhouse, but it's a meeting place in Ceres, and I know that for a fact.
Okay.
So, given that and the fact that we don't know what's going to happen with these cannabis dispensaries, is that something that we need to look at bringing back? And what would how many additional officers would we need to hire to do that without it affecting patrol or anything?
So, in 2014, I think we had 7 police officers frozen. That took our ability away from being a proactive department. I think it does have something to do with why we can't recruit people, because when you're young and you want to work in a department, it's difficult whenever you just provide basic, patrol and detectives, to be honest with you. So opportunity is a big thing. We're not proactive right now. I would say, yes, we do need to. That is the priority, and I spoke to Toby about that already. The street crimes unit had 4 officers and a sergeant before it was taken down in 2014. So it's something we could build up to.
We would need to hire 5 additional police officers?
I would say it would be something that you could build up to if you couldn't do it in a year, yes.
Give me your bottom line.
My bottom line,
how many would you need in order to bring back the street crimes unit?
5, a sergeant and 4.
So you would need to hire 5 right now to start it up. You don't have any existing personnel that could move into that. That would not affect the general safety of the city.
I'm a little bit confused about that. Obviously, some of the officers that are working here would be in that unit, so they would be new officers we would hire to work the streets and promote the other ones to that position. But that being said, it's been, 3 or 4 years since we've had the street crimes unit. So we brought on a lot of newer employees, and they don't have the experience, and we're losing that experience the longer that goes away. I hope that makes sense. That does happen in a lot of departments that cut the way we cut. So
To go from where we're at today to 5 would be difficult to do in one particular year.
Oh, no. I didn't, I had no intention that by bringing back the street crimes unit that we would hire 5 additional. I thought we would be able to move some existing and then maybe hire 1 or 2 to bring back the unit.
At the expense of patrol. There's the challenge, right? Right now, we've got 24 officers on patrol. To do that, you're going to be taking away from, the beat officers.
it would be difficult because we have 3 shifts during the day. We used to have 5. We brought that down to 3. We have 4. As a minimum, we have only 3 officers. So we did that to save overtime when the city was in the financial situation it was. So we could always miss 1 person off shift without collecting overtime for that. So we've basically been like that for the year because of the injury on duty and so forth. So our officers are working at minimums, and I don't know where I could take them from.
In order to have a proactive unit, we need additional bodies.
Okay.
And,
When we recruit these 3 vacancies, if you found 3 quality police officers, would we hire them right now?
Of course, yeah, we're actively recruiting for those currently. One of the lieutenants was in our office today saying, any new applicants? This is an ongoing, we're scouring the academies,
Do we offer bonuses at all or anything?
we currently do not.
Is that something we should be doing?
Something to consider, for sure. From a staff perspective, getting the negotiations completed is priority number 1, because obviously negotiations, and that gives some long-term outlook for any recruit. But anything else helps. Modesto and Turlock have both had some bonus incentives out there. Hasn't been tremendously successful for them, but whether it would work for us or not, we're definitely willing to try it. Modesto had a goal to hire 20 officers this year, and they haven't been able to hire anybody to replace who they've lost. They're still net down 20.
And I'm sorry, Councilmember Lane, I do agree that we need to bring the street crimes back.
Well, I'm curious, when we first organized it, was that in 2006? Was that when we
It was
first did it?
6 or 7, yes.
Somewhere in that range.
And at that time, how many officers did we have on patrol? Do you know?
We had 22, I believe.
And what was the difference in population, Tom? Was it?
It would have just been a couple thousand less in 2006.
And how many do we have on patrol right now?
Well, we're supposed to have 24.
24 budgeted positions currently. They're not full.
So the 3 current vacancies, does that reflect on the 48, or is that?
Correct.
So
48
that's
is budgeted.
For budget?
Yep.
That's what that is, but
48
3.
is budgeted. Yeah, we've got 3 openings currently.
So that would be a total, still the number would still remain the same.
As it's
So it's not additional.
Yeah, as it's currently drafted.
Right.
And I would say, though, before you talk about signing bonuses, I just want to throw in, it's difficult to give a new employee a signing bonus when the officers haven't seen anything since 2010. So that would be difficult for me to support. And also, I think if you just add the opportunities, you say you want a street crimes unit and traffic and stuff like that. That's really why we joined, to be able to go through all those positions in our career. And I know you know what I'm talking about because you have a son that's moving through the organization.
Yes.
And,
Not this organization. Let's be clear about that.
right. But it is, it's a lack of opportunity, I think, more than anything else.
Definitely one of the factors, and again, the negotiation, I'll keep hammering on that, getting that in place helps, and it also helps our officers because our existing officers are our best recruiting tool. When they talk to their friends, their colleagues, and they talk about a good place to work with opportunity, those are generally the employees that we have a tremendous amount of success with.
Yeah, I would agree that that's something that we need to work towards. It may take a while, but it's something that we should, after negotiations and that sort of thing, I mean, should be taking a look at if we can do anything with it, because I get it, you know. Maybe it'll put us in a better position once negotiations are over.
Right, and I think things are changing out there, and I think all of you see that with the homeless population, the gangs, and even the marijuana. Even though it's legal here, there's problems with it.
Sure.
And so we just had a homicide just outside the city limits in the county, and marijuana related. And so as soon as the grow season hits, by the end of summer, I'm telling you, we're going to have issues with it. And it's just a burden on the patrol officers that are already taxed. So, thanks.
In my
So-
opinion,
Go ahead, Chris. Go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, I agree with my colleagues there. You know, in light of all the activity that it seems that I've heard and observed in the last 6 months to a year, I think we need to focus on the police side of things, and I'm in agreement that, you know, if that means bringing back the street crimes unit, we need to find a way to do this.
We would likely not call it the street crimes unit.
Well, some other
Proactive.
term.
A proactive unit. Really, the focus is somebody who is proactive versus reactive. You know, and the structure and mission is probably a little different than it was in 06, 07, but we hear you loud and clear. Yeah, the proactive unit is what you're looking for. I agree 100%.
But we're talking about nearly $1.7 million worth of additional revenue that's come in as a result of the cannabis business. I think a portion of that money should be spent on police.
Yep. That's why we're collecting it.
You know, so I'm supportive of that. So.
The 3 current vacancies, does that include the 4th SRO? Or would it be 4 vacancies?
It'd be 4 vacancies.
So it'd be a 4th vacancy because of
That's
the
not approved yet.
needing the 4th SRO.
It's not approved yet, correct.
Okay, all right, I just wanted clarification
Actually,
on that.
I think it did include the new SRO.
Yeah, it says it.
I thought we talked earlier when we just,
The
so it's,
agreement
you
was
have 2
approved.
vacancies and the 3rd vacancy would be the SRO.
Correct. Yeah, the council gave me approval to overhire for Officer Woodward, and I released an employee on probation, and then the SRO, a new SRO.
Right,
Yeah.
so it's 2 vacancies plus the SRO to equal the 3.
That's the way I have it,
Okay,
yes.
that's why I just looking for clarification, because I know that the school district's paying, you know, a percentage of the SRO. So,
Toby, are you not clear on it?
What's that? We'll
Were you
clarify
not
that.
clear on that?
We'll
or-
clarify it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, that may not be reflecting any of this right now.
Well, no, it's budgeted, right?
Okay.
It's just a matter of the vacancy. I thought it was
Okay.
4 vacancies rather than the 4th, because the SRO, we approved the contract, but the budget won't be approved until you approve the 18-19 budget. Right? We didn't approve a budget amendment to fund that SRO position. But we'll clarify.
Is there any more comments on this? I know when we get to the end, you're gonna kind of go through what
Yep,
you want.
we'll wrap everything
But I
back up.
think the direction that you've heard from us is bring back to something that
Yep.
increases the numbers.
All right, so on to the fire department. So last but certainly not least, so Department 14 is the non-sworn portion. So again, that's one person who is split time, half-time in Department 13 code enforcement, half-time in Department 14 on the non-sworn, basically is the support staff. Really no change in the budget there. So for Department 15, the fire department, so currently 31 FTEs, full-time equivalents. What's currently in the budget is status quo for, as of the fiscal year 17-18 budget, which includes fire chief position, so fully burdened fire chief position at Step C is $267,000. That's currently included. The 3 battalion chiefs, 12 captains, and one of those captains is serving in the FIU, Fire Investigation Units, the county unit that's working with the DA, that we get reimbursed $165,000 of that fully burdened cost, which is around $185,000. The engineers, there's 12 engineers. There's currently 1 overstaff to backfill for that FIU. 2 engineers, as I mentioned earlier, have recently left the organization. What they're included in the budget is as firefighters. So we've recognized that savings between firefighter and engineer. And the 3 firefighters, again, status quo budget as to what we have today. So questions on that before we kind of talk about options? All right, so in order to kind of look at options there for staffing, in order to get to 3-0 staffing, so 3-person staffing at 3 stations, we would need 2 additional bodies. So a couple ways to get there. One, with the fire chief position, we could keep that position frozen. That would be enough to fund those 2 positions without any other changes. So fully burdened firefighter at step C is about $120,000, depending on what certifications they have, somewhere in that $105,000 to $120,000, depending on the range. Obviously, we have a list of safer guys that are available. There's at least 3 that are currently available, although that might drop to 2, but different than any other position to recruit for. Recruiting for a firefighter is a whole lot easier than recruiting for a police officer or a dispatcher or any of those other functions. So that would be one option. We could freeze the fire chief position and could easily fund those 2 firefighters and be whole. Other options, we could complete a reorganization of the department and restructure to be reflective of 3 stations. As you remember, we used to have 4 stations, 2-0 staff, so that meant a captain and an engineer. And when we started dialing back from 4 stations to now 3 stations with the SAFER grant, now you're a little heavy on captains and engineers. So if we were to reorganize those and do the demotions accordingly, that could generate probably around $100,000 savings. So with the budget as it's presented right now, those changes, an additional cost of $100,000 would all be necessary to fund those 2 firefighters. And so that could be funded through Measure H, which has the cushion to do that, or some other combination of cuts. So those are 2 options right off the top for the 3-0 staffing, and there's other variations we could get to get to 3-0 staffing. One other consideration would be 4-0 staffing at 2 stations. Don't recommend that from my perspective. Having done this role for the last year and recognizing, very simply put, 4 stations is better than 3, 3 stations is better than 2. If we can all afford it, we need to be providing the community the highest level of service we can possibly afford, and 3 stations for a city of 47,000 plus a service area outside of that of another at least 13,000 between Serious Fire Protection and the industrial contract. To go down to two stations at 8 people is a definite stretch. So would not recommend that. However, with those numbers, the gross savings of going to 4-0 staffing and reorganizing accordingly would be a captain, an engineer, and 2 firefighters on each of those stations would result in a gross savings of about $413,000. However, it would be offset likely, and I say likely because we would have to negotiate this with our partner, Modesto, under the JPA with the industrial fire contract. Because we staff Station 16, we receive $237,000 from those revenues. So the assumption is we would lose that revenue, so the net impact would be $175,000.
Where is Station 16?
That's Pecos.
Okay, and how much does it cost us to run that?
From rough number of all-in, fully burdened staffing and equipment is probably about $1.4 million.
And we receive 200,000?
7,000, correct.
And in this budget, it seems to me that when we approve the SAFER grant funding, that in order to hire 6 additional firefighters, that we did some temporary promotions.
That I would have to look back at it.
Okay.
I don't believe that was the case. There was nothing temporary in those promotions, but that I'd have to verify.
Well, I would like that verified because I thought the discussion was it was temporary while we had the SAFER grant. And so does this budget reflect those same promotions?
We didn't, yeah, it's status quo. So the same that we had budgeted for 17-18 is what's currently included in the 18-19 budget. We didn't make any of those changes until we received council direction as to what you'd like to do for the structure of the department before we did anything different.
Okay.
But with that reorganization, so the 2 engineers that have left, reclassifying those as firefighters, though obviously built-in savings there, frozen captain and engineer position, if those were to be reclassified as firefighters, that's another $150,000 savings between those 2. So you're effectively have reorganized. If you take that next step to get to 3 stations, 3O staffed, you would complete that, and any of those temporary changes would likely be erased with that reorganization.
So if I'm following you correctly, we're budgeted for 12 captains, but currently we have 11 because there's one frozen. Is that what you're?
No, there's 12 budgeted.
There's 12 bodies right now.
Correct.
And there's 12 engineers, but 2 of them, so currently we have 10 engineers.
Correct.
Okay. So that's currently 10. Okay. And currently we only have 3 firefighters?
Correct.
And so to maintain 3O staffing, we're backfilling overtime with engineers or captains?
Right. That is correct.
So really the question I'm going to ask is because it was brought up, and I know this is budget and it's a little bit off, but when you backfill them like that, are you backfilling them at their current rate or the position they're filling?
At their current rate.
Okay.
That's why you said there's a reclassification that would have to take.
Okay, no, I'm just asking because if I remember correctly, if you worked out of your classification and you went from a firefighter to an engineer for a certain period of time, and then they got a bump in pay, but it doesn't
Works
work.
one way, yeah,
but it
but
doesn't
not
work
the
the
other.
other way.
Yeah.
That's where I was going. Okay.
We have how many people out right now?
In
Firefighters?
the firefighters?
Out, hurt, sick.
1 injury, 1 FMLA currently.
We've spent a lot of money in overtime because we've obviously haven't had the people there.
Well, we've had other injuries as well, and again, it just takes a little baby boom and some FMLA leave for.
So since we gave the SAFER grant, how much money have we been spending a month? You know?
I want to say average about 60,000 in overtime. Does that sound about right, Suzanne? I'm thinking average is about 28,000 per pay period over the past several months.
And had we not gave that back, it maybe only would have cost us about 30,000?
Less than that.
Less than that. So like 2-person fire stations, I know we've had this talk, I know I've talked with Captain Miller, if you had 2 fire stations with 4 individuals on it and 1 person called in sick, you would still be in compliance to be able to be part of the regional because you have 3-0?
Correct. But taking that to the furthest extreme, if you allowed that to go down to 6, that seems crazy to me to have serving a population of 60,000 people with 6 uniformed firefighters in place. That is a far cry from where we've been. It takes 1 pit crew CPR, 2 accidents at the same period of time, and you're completely exhausted our resources.
But under the same scenario that you were having 3 at 3, if 2 are gone, we're at 7.
Yeah, but
which is one
that's not
different
I'm
than
at,
what you're
but we
proposing
wouldn't-
here.
But no, but 3O staffed, the minimum staffing would be 9. You would maintain minimum staffing. We wouldn't go down from that. Would not recommend it going down from that.
Okay.
So then we're still going to do overtime.
Well, you're 24/7 operation. You're always going to have overtime. I mean, people still get sick. People go on vacations. You're going to have overtime, just like the fire department. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have people have babies. That's just a fact of it. If you want to reduce your overtime budget, then we need to fill relief positions.
So what is the call volume for each station? Do you know that?
Not off the top of my head, I can get that information, but generally.
Weren't we going to have fire discussion tonight?
Well, I didn't know we were getting into call volumes, but about 6,000 calls per year for the 4 areas. So station 1 or 18, or I'm sorry, 15 is the highest volume station. Station 2 is Pecos, second highest volume. Station 4, which is on Fowler, third highest. Lowest volume station is the station is closed. Service Road, Station 3.
And you and I have had this discussion before about the percentage of responses for boundary dropping. It far exceeds what we are putting out than what we're receiving.
On a call volume, on a number for number, correct. But again, the analogy that I've used is you're trading an SUV for an RV, right? When we need the resources to have 21 personnel on a working structure fire, they're coming automatically. And that is a huge, huge difference.
Versus mutual aid,
Versus mutual aid.
where they would come, but it maybe wouldn't be as quick.
I'm sorry.
Where they would still come, but it maybe just wouldn't be
It's
as
going to be a
fast.
longer period of time, correct. Yeah, and under mutual aid, they're responding if they can. Right, under resource sharing, it's auto aid, they're getting dispatched. Right, so the phrase is the run cards, the automatic, when the dispatcher pulls it up, they're automatically, for a working structure fire, they're automatically dispatching the apparatus that's necessary from the closest resources to ensure that those are there.
So when we have 3 stations operating and we get a call for boundary sharing or boundary dropping, and they wind up in North Modesto, correct?
Correct.
And then say it was Station 1, so now one of the other stations in Ceres is going to cover that.
Normally, the closest unit is going to go. So if it's in, central to North Modesto, 16, or Station 2, is going to go, and the resources are going to move. Obviously, it's a little different depending on whether it's a truck or an engine.
So then effectively, we have 2 stations operating in town when they go to those calls.
And that's where the battalion chiefs come into play, and they're generally running resources, which is meanings they're coordinating the other activity within the county to ensure that everyone's got coverage when those, working structure fires are going on. It's not uncommon to have, if you're down here, it's not uncommon to see a battalion chief from Consolidated sitting in front of Station 1. It's not uncommon to have an engine here as well. And that's the way resource sharing works, is we're sharing those resources to provide the highest level of service possible. It works. It's demonstrated to work time and time and time again.
What I'd like to see is the 2-4 scenario, 2 stations.
See what? I just gave you the numbers. What else do you need to see?
The whole budget.
The budget impact.
Yeah, it's a $175,000 savings.
No, but we're asking for other things too. We're asking possibly for Fort Parks. We can go over each one of them and then put that in your budget and see what that looks like, along with, officers also we're asking for, so.
Okay, so we'll need relative priority to all of those. That's what I'm looking for.
Toby, you said it was $175,000 savings to do what the mayor just said?
Correct.
But I thought I heard 412. What was that for?
That's the difference between losing the industrial contract, the revenue from the industrial contract. 413 minus 237, net 175.
But I thought it was costing us $1 million for that.
I'm sorry?
I thought I heard it was $1 million.
Correct. That's what's, the budgeted cost is incorporated. What I'm saying is the net savings associated with going to 4.0 staffing at 2 stations and closing the Pecos station, we would lose the industrial revenue.
Correct.
And so the net impact to the budget is $175,000 savings.
And
I don't know why I
that
have
doesn't come
400
out right, because you're saying
412.
to run Pecos, it was costing us a little over $1 million. So it's,
But you're reorganizing the entire department with that, right? You're going down to, you're reducing everything down, right? Captains, engineers, firefighters, you're reducing all of that. You're replacing a bunch of engineers and captains with firefighters. All of that is reflective.
Where do you see in those numbers, Suzanne? May I ask?
She's the one that created those numbers. That's the staffing cost. Obviously, we haven't built in the station costs.
I did do those calculations, and it is correct, it's $412,577. There's significant demotions that go on, but we would actually have to hire one more person in order to have the 28 bodies that we would need to achieve the 4.0 staffing. And that's exclusive, that excludes the BCs and the fire chief. So that savings is primarily for the fire union. I didn't make copies of what I did, but I do have it available.
Talking about the difference between 27 staff and 24 staff.
We'd have to have,
Well,
I have
talking line
28
staff plus the
FTEs.
FIU would be 28. 28 versus 25.
Yeah, I have 28
Talking about
FTEs
the
in there, and I
staffing
have the
for
2 overstaffed
Fire
positions.
station staffing.
So that's basically losing no positions at all, right?
Well, neither option is losing positions.
I mean, Either option.
Right,
Can you show
in both
those?
cases, you're
Can you put
adding one.
that together in a whole package to reflect the bottom line on the numbers, along with some of the other things we're asking too? I mean,
Of course.
You know what I mean? It makes it easier because we can talk about one department, then we'll talk about another
So
department.
let's, if we're done with the fire conversation, there's more questions, then we can move on to that overall total comprehensive. You can give us some direction in terms of
Ms. Dean, you had a
ultimate
question?
priorities.
Comment?
I was just going to say, for the 3O staffing, we actually would have to add 2 more positions in order to achieve 3O staffing over what we currently have. So we wouldn't be laying off anyone. There would be 4 demotions, and we would have to add 2 more positions to have enough firefighters.
That would be for 3 stations.
For 3O at 3 stations, correct. And the 4O at 2 stations, you still need to add 1 more position, but there are significantly more demotions that would have to occur.
So I think what I would like to see, I mean, I can't make a decision either way right now without having all the information in front of me. So for me personally, I'd like to see both scenarios as the options so that I can make an educated decision. That's what I'm asking for.
I would agree with that.
What both options?
The 3-0.
The 3-0 and the
3-0
4-0?
and the 4-0.
Yeah,
Okay.
we know it's.
And now, when you say 3-0, you're talking 3-0?
3-3-0.
Okay, 3 stations with 3 and 2 stations with 4.
Correct.
Okay, I just want a clarification.
I mean, I don't know what other options
Right.
there are.
No.
The other option is status quo,
Well, status quo doesn't work.
as what you presented with.
Well, I mean, again, that was the draft for looking for
Right,
status
that's-
quo.
that's status
We have
quo.
2 we have 2
Right.
vacancies. The status quo does
But
not
going
work.
3-0, you're gonna add 2 fire departments, 2
Correct.
fire.
We have
right.
2 vacant positions that need to be
Going
filled. and-
4, you're gonna go, have to add 1, but there's gonna be some shifting around and that sort of thing.
So does-
we don't really know that number.
Does everyone
until you
agree?
Sit down and put it
So
together.
under those scenarios, you're talking of the difference between 1 position and 2 positions. So do I have the authorization to fill one of those positions immediately?
To be honest with you, and I'll just go and say it right now, that I
Because of
seriously.
the overtime costs that you're referencing, Councilman
Right,
Ross.
but, I mean, until we get a budget done, I mean, not a budget done, until our negotiations are done, I know there's still a little bit of time left to hire anybody. We have a situation whereas we have all these employees that we've had and have been around, stuck around.
It's a budgeted position, already budgeted.
It is a budget, but there's a lot of budgeted positions that when we sit here and you think, I'm trying to do the math on it, the numbers, that, to have this amount of park people, maybe to have 2 more police officers, maybe to have the Parks and Rec person, I mean, all that money's gone that we have got to.
Those are
Now,
already
we're
all
going to go
budgeted.
back in the reserves? That's all I'm saying.
Well, what we'd be adding would be out of what we currently have. Be 2 firemen possibly, right?
Those are already budgeted.
2 or 1. No, but you're
They're
saying.
already- they're already included in
the
that number.
3-0 staffing?
I'm saying for the 2 vacant positions are already
I
budgeted.
understand.
They're already included
I
in this number.
understand. But just help me understand that we're on the same page. So what you have here is 2 more, but 2 more firemen would need to be added to your current budget to go 3-0 staffing, is that correct? Or 1 if it goes to 4?
Correct.
Okay, so we need to see that scenario. That's all.
I'm just asking what else you need to see. If those are the only 2 options to consider, why can't we move forward to hire the 1 position now and save the overtime costs?
Because we haven't seen everything completely, maybe.
That's what I'm asking. I mean,
Yeah, I'd like to see it done. I mean, I'd like to.
we're
see-
going to continue to spend that amount in overtime, but
Well, there's just so many things at play here. I want to see the numbers. I've heard rhetoric from the fire guys that, they're willing not to take a raise to keep bodies. Now, I don't believe that that's what we should do to them, but if that's the direction they want to go, then we need to look at those numbers because we still have negotiations that are yet to take place.
And I would agree with Councilmember DeRossett that we really do need to look at where we're going with our negotiations because we have had all of the loyal employees that haven't gotten a pay raise in 10 years. And so if we start hiring people left and right and then we're like, oh, yeah, we don't have any money for negotiations, I mean, is that really fair too? There has to be some kind of
They're
a
vacant-
middle ground.
They're vacant budgeted positions today.
Okay.
And we're at 22% fund balance.
We used to be at 42.
Yeah. We don't want to
Why?
go there again.
That makes no sense. Why would you keep that?
Do you want direction, or do you want us to give you the
I'm-
direction?
I'm looking for the direction.
You're
I'm
not
just-
listening to anything that we're telling you.
No, I am listening.
No, you're not.
So you're saying I can't hire any positions?
Right now, that's what you have heard, yes. Don't keep pushing the issue, okay? You've heard it from a number of us. We want to see the numbers before we make a decision,
Understood.
okay? You're testing my patience.
Are we done with fire?
Yes, we are.
Moving on to the Measure H. So status quo for Measure H. The 7 police officers includes the high-tech, 7 firefighters and engineers. Again, as I mentioned, the move of the fire overtime from Measure H to the general fund. Not all of it, but $270,000. And some one-time expenditures that are listed in the budget. We can go over those if you'd like. This is what Measure H looks like. There's room there in the grand scheme of things. The Measure H Oversight Committee has not seen this draft budget yet. They will see that on June 6th and review those proposed expenditures. As I mentioned, $131,000 would be the projected fund balance at the end of fiscal year 18-19. Any questions on Measure H?
Now, if we go to a tax base on cannabis, would that come into play for Measure Ace also?
Well, it's a business license tax is what we'd be charging. It would be separate. We're already collecting under sales tax. We're already collecting our half-cent sales tax on any cannabis that's sold.
So if we went to a sales tax,
It's not we're not
12%, that none of that goes to Measure H?
It's a business license tax is what we're
Okay,
proposing, so
okay.
it's separate.
All right.
But the sales tax is still collected. So any cannabis, non-medical cannabis is being, sales tax is being collected.
Okay.
Any questions on Measure H?
No.
So here's a summary, grand scheme of things, draft budget as we've discussed, so $21.2 million in general fund expenditures. Personnel costs are 74% of that, $15.7 million. With the Measure H, those $3.1 million of Measure H, total expenditure of $24.3 million. Public safety is approximately 81% of that total. So then, kind of coming back to where we're at and looking for the relative priority of those items that I've listed there, in no particular order, but this is where I need some council direction as to putting the final budget together, what parameters. So the base parameter would be 1, what is the minimum general fund reserve balance? So prior to this year, it's been 18%. So is that different? So that'd be the first question.
I'm comfortable with 18%.
So am I.
Me too.
Gives you some leeway.
Sure. So 18, 18, 18, 18, 18. Okay, gives us tremendous flexibility. Okay, and so then moving down this list in whatever particular order you would like, I think I heard loud and clear the rec coordinator to a full-time position you're not interested in at this point in time?
Is that
I heard it from
what we said?
I
I think
two.
what,
I think it was a split decision, but
no, I guess it's the rec manager that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I'd say no rec coordinator right now. I mean, if we gotta have a rec manager to
we
save
have
our
a rec
recreation.
we have a rec coordinator part-time.
Right,
That's
and we keep her
what's
part-time.
budgeted is a rec coordinator full-time.
And we're talking, how much money?
25,000.
20?
20, I mean, what's
25,000.
included in there? You're talking,
Yeah, it's in the budget. I have no problem with that. The rec
with both the rec coordinator at full-time and the rec manager.
correct. For me, I don't.
Okay, you're okay?
I'm okay with it.
You're okay?
It doesn't matter.
It does matter, because I haven't heard.
I'm okay.
You're okay with both?
Yes,
I'm fine.
because it shows it in the budget already.
So that's what I needed to do? Needed to show more?
Maybe not.
Just kidding, just kidding. So, okay, so that's clear. First two items, we're good to go there. Now, on the rec manager, do I have the authority to move forward on the recruitment of that position immediately? It's already a budgeted position.
I'm fine with that.
Fine with it.
See a head nod over there? Head nod? Yes, no?
Abstain.
Councilmember Rhino?
Well, on one hand, I'm saying yes, and on the other, no, because then I hear the conversation about we don't want to fill any of our positions till we know what we're going to do with our budget.
But he said it's already budgeted.
That's true.
So are the 2 firefighter positions, and so is the
Yeah,
3 police officer positions.
that's
And
what
by the
I'm
time you
getting
go
at.
through all this process, you're down to 17%, and all the let's call it, cannabis money's gone.
Yeah.
We don't know that. You're just,
I'm
until we
just
see the
making an
numbers.
assumption. And the other aspect of is it ever get watered down, whereas, you know, maybe we're getting 1.7 million this year, and maybe next year it's only 1.2 million.
Again, nothing stays the way. If that happens, then
get
we
it.
go back to where we are today.
Well, do we want to just hold that until we see this other information
I-
that we're asking for?
I think we need to see our numbers before we hire anybody.
Whole picture.
Because what if we get,
Because I think it's given you a little more flexibility talking about going from 22 to 18% too.
What are you talking, 6 weeks maybe?
Because none of these things are really affecting that number.
4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, with what's already budgeted and the room and cushion that by going to 18% creates, we can get a long ways to the needs that you guys have referenced this evening. The rec manager
and we
position.
still haven't concluded negotiations. Keep
Correct.
that in mind.
100%.
Maybe Captain Collins would like to step in until we can make
For
a
6
final
weeks,
decision.
for 6 weeks until the budget is approved.
I think he's dressed in recreation
Yeah,
red.
the chief will nominate him for 6 weeks?
So currently, we are already staffing, Tom Westbrook is handling that duty on a short-term basis.
Could he do that full-time?
No.
General plan's
This is
done.
a short-term, again, our hope was being able to move forward on the
Sorry,
recruitment of
Tom.
that position
6 weeks.
tomorrow.
Yeah, you can have 6.
Oh, and that was, we put that process in place, but if I don't get authorization to recruit until July, it's not 6 weeks, it's 15 weeks, right? Because it's gonna take us a while to recruit for that
Well,
position.
I think he can handle it. He's kind of a big guy. He can handle it.
We will likely have to eliminate some programming, though. We don't have the staffing to accomplish. Because he's handling the administrative oversight, we still lose the 40 hours a week of work that Tracy was doing.
I would say let's hold off on it, and then if we lose some programming temporarily, then so be it. We lose it. I mean, we're cutting services in other areas, so if we have to do that.
Couldn't we use this rec coordinator right now with Cambria, and understanding that there's a little urgency and everything might not be the way it was when Tracy was here, but, and then when we get the budget done, or we get the negotiations done, and a rec manager is what we need to get, you're still gonna have somebody 40 hours a week. It's still almost gonna be the same. You might lose 20 hours. And sure, you're losing 15 years of experience. I completely get that. But at the very end of the day, too, you know, there's a lot of needs that we see that we think we want.
So can I hire the rec coordinator permanent tomorrow?
No, you can't do that because
I mean, I have to come
then-
back for council action, but the
No,
savings
be-
is already.
Can't you add just 20 hours of the work week and make
Well,
them
yeah, but he
full-time for
wants
right
to,
now?
he wants to make her full-time, and I think she's working right now an
She's
additional
working
20.
full-time.
But if
Unfortunately, she
you-
can only do that for about a month before we'll run into Affordable Care Act issues.
And
So,
Before you run into a what?
Affordable Care Act. She can't work more than 20 hours, 29 hours on average per month without getting benefits. So can only do that for a short period of time. We will push the limits completely as of June 30th, with we allow her to work 40 hours for the month of June. So if you're not going to allow me to hire the rec manager, I'd ask that you allow me to go full-time with the rec coordinator immediately.
Cheaper.
It's cheaper, and it allows me to get the hours that I need for
But
that
you're still
person.
saying we need the rec manager, so in essence,
Absolutely.
then in essence, we're gonna wind up with 3 full-time people instead of the 2.5 that we pretend.
Maybe.
No, we are
No,
because,
because maybe we don't hire the rec manager.
well, I think we've all heard that
we probably need to, based on, we don't have any other department head that can
But you guys all
oversee
just talked
that.
yourselves out of it. You started off the conversation saying, yes, hire them both, and now you've just talked yourselves out of it to say,
Well,
not to.
that's what discussion's all about,
Exactly. I'm just trying to follow it, that's all.
in open session.
What do you think, Klein? Councilmember Klein?
Vice Mayor.
Vice Mayor, sorry.
Well, I'm in agreement with the mayor on this one. I mean, you know, we're looking at 6 weeks, and, you know, I think that, you know, we've already lost the Series Dolphins, you know?
We had nothing to do with that.
I.
But we don't administer that program at all.
But, you know, we've already lost a couple of things within the city for things, for programs, that, yes, Series Dolphins
Yeah, they were not
didn't have
city
nothing to do
programs.
with
Right.
things, that, you know, I think for the next 6 weeks or so, I think that we lean on staff to get this thing forward until we can approve the budget.
I agree.
I
With the
agree.
mayor and vice mayor.
I agree.
I agree.
So that's no on the rec manager and on the rec coordinator.
No.
No, we said on the coordinator, go ahead and increase that. At least that's what I thought.
Oh,
No, I didn't say that.
None of them, is that what you're saying?
Well, the rec coordinator can go full-time till the end of June, and then you have to cut her back down,
Correct.
correct?
Yes.
So why can't we do that? And then we can lean on, you know,
Because if you've hired her as a full-time, then
Yeah.
then you have to pay her
I don't
Affordable
think he
Care
said
Act.
hire her. I think just give her the 20 hours until the 29th day and then back her down, right? Or whatever.
Yeah, but we're gonna have,
Or-
we're gonna have
or
a gap
hire.
in July.
Or hire.
or hire her for the additional
Or hire her
hours.
at that time.
But we have to have all of the numbers.
But by the end of June, we'll have our
Yeah.
budget.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
By the end of June, we'll have our budget in front of us for approval.
yeah. So does that give you the direction on those two?
Yep.
Okay. And we're not saying no on the rec manager, we're just saying we want to see the
Put
numbers.
it in context.
We need to see all the
Yep.
numbers.
As Public Works Superintendent, I think we already got the answer on that. I can move forward on getting that recruitment, or getting the job description finalized and start that recruitment, correct?
And you're eliminating the,
Public Works Supervisor, yes.
so next year, we won't see that as a,
It'll show in the budget is that there will be no position for the Public Works Supervisor, there will be position for Public Works Superintendent.
okay.
Remember, I asked him that question, and he said no.
Ms.
he
Dean?
would not bring
You
it
had a
back.
question.
I just want to clarify, we're not going, from my perspective, we don't want to completely eliminate the position, we just want to unfund it. So it is still a classification within the city, we just don't want it funded, much like the unfunded police officers and the other positions.
Correct.
Correct?
Because we
Okay.
do have a Public Works Supervisor already functioning in
Correct.
wastewater.
Correct.
Okay?
So on the next, on the additional funding, I don't know that it would be temp, but I think we said we wanted to increase staffing in that area, so we'd like to see what that looks like for a couple more full-time bodies. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's a couple
Are you
of-
opposed to part-time if we were to do a full-time and a part-time, or?
Or two full-time and one part-time?
Can you give us scenarios?
I guess
Can
what
you
I-
do that?
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm asking for. 'Cause,
Yes.
I mean,
I'm okay with
82,000, I mean, $150,000 would go a long ways towards that. So if we had one full-time and two temporary, that'd go a long ways to getting us in much better shape between now and the end of the year. And then, you know, again, mid-year, add a second position.
Or we can use one of our streets people, right? Isn't that what you had mentioned?
Well, no, that was
Oh,
different.
that was for code
That was code
enforcement.
enforcement, correct.
Good decision. I would just say work with Jeremy
Yeah, I
to
mean,
come up
again-
with the number that
Correct.
you feel is adequate.
Again, we want to be able to move quickly, because the need is now, right? The need in parks is now, not July 1, right?
Well, yeah, but all the grass is dying, so it doesn't need to be mowed.
There's the challenge. You got to have bodies to maintain sprinkler systems.
I realize that, but right now, the mowing,
How long does it take to get a hire a couple and?
6 weeks easy.
Huh?
Yeah, 6 to 8 weeks to start the recruitment, get folks in here. By the time you get through 2 interviews, 6 to 8 weeks for sure.
That's to hire somebody full-time?
Correct.
How about the part-time, though?
Part-time, we can get tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Temp staffing, we can get within a couple days.
Do it.
Can you get part-time tomorrow, Jeremy? Can you hire some part-time guys tomorrow? Yeah, okay. Yeah?
We have arrangements with temp agencies to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Right. May not be literally tomorrow, but within a week, we can have a body here to help.
Like a Mona Lisa painting where it's beautiful, but anyway.
Okay, so I heard you loud and clear on that one. Flexibility and options there. We'll skip fire and police for now. We'll go down.
No, we can address fire.
Well,
I mean,
it's going to go to code
what-
enforcement.
Again, I just want to clarify, I think I can speak first. We don't know what direction we want yet. We'd like to see all the numbers. It may stay status quo. I don't know. But we'd like to see what all those different scenarios and numbers look like so that we can make that educated decision. And I'd even like to see the analysis of what the reclassification would have to be so we'd see how that kind of gets impact everyone and kind of have a feel for that. Am I?
So you're looking for numbers for 330 staffing, 3 stations, three personnel versus
Correct.
that, and you're looking for numbers for 2 stations, 40 staffing.
Correct.
Okay. I just want a clarification that we're all on the same page.
Unless you have another option.
No, like I say, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
And with those considerations, continuing to leave the fire chief funded.
Yes, because
Yeah.
one of the things that we did to this council a few years back, we eliminated Director of Public Safety and Acting City Manager, and we went to City Manager, Fire Chief, and Police Chief, and I think we need to keep the Fire Chief a funded position.
Yeah.
And I think we need to get the budget done and move forward with the Fire Chief.
I think we have it as a funded position right now, obviously, and it maybe remains that way. But if we go 3-0 staffing, then again, part of your process is gonna be, are we gonna do administrative costs and fire marshal with maybe the city of Modesto to oversee some of that, where it's a savings of $100,000 or whatever it is. That make sense?
Likely more than that.
Can you show us that too?
They already have it. I mean, we could do
Well, I
an
mean, with each
administrative.
scenario.
Yeah, of course.
You know, it's easier for me to just look at, this is what it is, this is total costs. Doing business with 40 station. This is total cost for doing 3-0 staffing with 3 stations, right? If you could show that way would be, instead of putting all the numbers together, I guess it would just make it a lot easier.
Yep.
I guess the other thought is if we had a fire chief, what would he perceive would be the best things for our citizens? You know what I'm saying?
3-0 staff with 3 stations.
He'd say 3-0 staff at 3
100%.
stations. Oh,
Well,
wait.
4-0. I mean, if you really want to get technical, what
Well, yeah,
what
I don't wanna be that technical. That
Yeah,
costs
you want
too much
4 on
money.
a truck, and you want a much higher level
I'll
service.
open up
than
in a
what we have.
minute.
Two?
So you're saying, Shep, you're saying 2 stations,
4-0 because that eliminates the need of an extra engine coming in with 1 engine with 4 people can satisfy if stuff.
okay.
So, don't worry, I'm going to
Incorrect.
open it up in just a minute. Let him finish, and then I'll open up for people to speak.
So in spending a tremendous amount of time talking to the other fire chiefs and the other, obviously spending a lot of conversation with our internal staff, I mean, again, it's not this or this, right? You want to provide the highest level of service you possibly can, and 2-0 staffing is unacceptable. Right?
I agree with that.
Right.
I'm sorry.
2-0 staffing is unacceptable. 3-0 staffing is the preferred minimum. If you have a truck, the preferred is 4-0, right? So in a perfect world, we'd have 4-0 staffing on a truck, 3-0, 3-0, with the fire marshal, with the fire chief, and all of those other, plus an apparatus replacement program. I mean, there's, again, like we've talked about, there's more needs across the organization. We didn't even talk about that as the need for 2 apparatus replaced, and we need that now. 'Cause it's going to take a year to get those replaced, and there's several options on how to fund that, but we need that yesterday. I haven't bought a new apparatus in over 11 years, so that's an immediate need as well.
Okay, any other questions on this?
And then the last one there is police. So
Well, then
just
on police, I think we indicated we'd like to see.
work towards something on a proactive unit.
Correct.
Okay.
What that looks like, you can come back and let us know.
So that on code enforcement, is it either or from your perspective, or just one of those?
Either or, explain it.
Meaning another code enforcement officer, or that, call it hybrid position, streets.
Well, if we did another code enforcement officer and we used the street position, then when they hopefully got caught up, Could we back out of that with the street?
Yeah, there's plenty of work to do in streets, there's no doubt there.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just that other funding source that we're matching that position with has to do something with, the waste side of things. So that other funding source may not be eligible if we back out of that in the future. So that may have to go from a 50% funded to something else, or 100% funded out of the general fund, and you shift it, or to some other, there's other departments we could half fund that position for if that
Okay.
didn't work.
I mean, for me, I'd say both options are on the table.
We didn't talk about the deputy finance director.
Correct.
We did, but.
We did. Again, relative importance to these
Right.
conversations, from our perspective, it's important, but lower than these, but that's where I look for, that's a policy decision where the council needs to provide us some
Well,
direction.
why don't you give us that dollar amount and everything when you do your whole analysis?
Yeah, like I said, it's
If you
between
could add
60
that dollar amount.
between 60 and 75,000. Somewhere in that
I
range.
think you should come back with it part of the scenario.
Okay, anything else you had, or?
Nope, just, again, summary of that direction, and then, as it stands right now, the next would be scheduled for approval on June 25th. With what I'm hearing from council, it sounds like you may want to do a special meeting before that.
Well, why can't we just
when are you-
discuss?
when are you
I will
available?
not be back until June the 16th.
So it would have to be after June 16th. Okay. So I guess what we need to do is look for dates after June 16th before the 25th.
I mean, you don't have to,
Or-
I mean, we can make the decisions the night of the 25th, but.
Why
I
can't?
think there's.
Yeah,
I
but
think
see,
there's a lot to
I'm
discuss.
leaving for work the 18th to the 21st, and I won't be back till Thursday night. That whole week I'm
Looks
gone.
like
Can
the
we push
25th.
the 25th?
25th it is.
Well, we can
No, I
do-
mean, can we have the 25th as our first review and then an approval subsequent to that?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
So would you like me to search calendars and get another date plugged in the calendar for a special meeting, just in case?
Sure.
Okay, we'll do.
Well, when are you gone?
I'm leaving the 18th, and I won't be back till the
Something after
20th.
June 25th, something of that week, likely the Wednesday or the Thursday.
Well, Mike,
So-
Vice Mayor won't be here.
But
We'll
after the 25th, we're talking about the
Oh,
26th.
We'll
after
figure out the
25th,
dates,
okay.
don't worry.
27th or 28th would be the likely
Okay.
time.
So at this time, I want to open it up to the audience. Anybody that would like to speak on this item, please come forth.
I'm just calling on 35 years of experience, but I concern myself with firefighter safety, and the standard throughout the nation has become 4 on an engine, 6 on a truck. The reason being that it's the safest for firefighters, and it reduces the number of pieces of equipment that has to respond to a call. If you have 4 on an engine, and I don't know whether anybody pays the attention, but it's called 2 in and 2 out. So you have 2 people going into a structure, let's say, and you need 2 people outside, 1 to staff the engine and the other to take any kind of assistance to the 2 in. If you only have 3 staffing, you have to have another engine. That means 6 people have to come to 1 call, 2 engines. To me, it doesn't make sense. I've said this all along to past chiefs and so forth. We got to stop thinking about, we have to start thinking about firefighter safety. Personally, that's number 1 to me. And we don't, if you have to have 3 engines to cover for 2 4.0s, you're wasting money. That's my own personal opinion. I've only been in the fire service 35 years, and I've only been around the country talking to people and going to training sessions and stuff all over the U.S. What most departments shoot for is 4.0. Staffing because of firefighter safety and because it takes less equipment. Now, that's just a personal opinion. But I really and truly think you need to think about. Now, I don't know anything about your agreements with Modesto on Station 2. I have no idea what it may be. That may be a station you can't eliminate because you got some sort of an agreement. But 1 and 4 seem to me, of course, I never thought 4 was a real prime location anyway, but I live over there, so I can't say it's bad. But it wouldn't be my pick, but I would just say that you try to come up with some way of making that 4.0 staffing work. To me, it's when I was a battalion chief, I dreaded seeing some of these situations where you had to have 3 engines just to have enough people to do the job. Because a lot of places were doing 2.0 staffing and it just was a mess. So firefighters were getting hurt, and my whole point is safety for firefighters. That's it. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rebecca Harrington. I live at 522 Bystrom Road, Modesto, California, 95351. I am down the street from the Ceres Fire Department located at Pecos and Bystrom. Real quick, just one little thing. TRPP, I still would love for you guys to get back into it because a lot of that money is going to be designated to the Mancini Park, which is south of the Tuolumne River, which is in the sphere of influence for Ceres, which is my area, which we are now considered the North Ceres area. So that's my little tidbit on that one. I am a very big advocate for my park. Secondly, I'm a huge advocate for our fire department. Literally, I see them daily going down my street. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that they're going to take care of have to do with medical, but on occasions, last year in May, when we had Pedro's pallets burning down to the ground, and I am directly one city block from that 9th Street corner, and at my home we could feel the heat directly. If it wasn't for this station and the hard work that they did to keep safety, they brought in engine, one from Modesto. It was a 5-alarm fire, and they did an absolutely exemplary job. When we've called on them to come out into our community and help us in cleanups for the park, if they are not busy, they are there. The minute that bell rings, they're out there. They are gone and out and doing their job. But I will guarantee you this. We have been considered a disenfranchised, lower socioeconomic community, which is by most standards and practiced by most governmental agencies, given what's called it's been dealt with, it's called an environmental injustice. So to remove that station from an area that is already affected in many ways economically, socially disadvantaged, people give us the last thought. We are always the bottom of the totem pole, the very bottom, but we pay our taxes. My dad, up until his passing 2 years ago, paid his taxes for the last 59, 60 years, because our property, we've owned it since 1950. So we pay our taxes diligently. We have been out there doing things, making sure that we had a sewer when nobody was going to put a sewer out there, and then it being taken over by the city of Ceres because of eminent domain or whatever happened at that particular time. But I will guarantee you this. If you look to cut that station, I will do whatever is necessary to fight City of Ceres on it. I will contact attorneys. I have no problem doing that. I did that with Modesto City Schools when they were not going to give us our voting for District 7. I made one phone call to an attorney in San Francisco, and we had representation. Modesto City Schools overturned their vote, first time ever in their history. So I guarantee you that if you're going to take something away from our community and you're going to move the valuable service that these firefighters give to our community, I will fight you, and I will get everybody that I need to get on board to fight you. California Rural Legal Assistant, my attorney in San Francisco, veterans that I work with closely, some of them who have been former firefighters with the city of Modesto, and anybody else who is willing to hear, including El Concilio, anybody that we can. Now tonight, yes, I'm the only one here because I put out a little notice last night. It was late. But I guarantee you, I will come here to fight for that station because it is critical in our area. We have had so many fires. I can count them. I can count them on my hand, and I can tell you all the fires that we've had there. And if had it not been for having that fire station in our community, that the effects could have been far worse than what they were. They contained it. They did their job. These men work hard. They work for their community. I support what they do. I wish that we could do a lot more. It is hard to get people to advocate and to get out there and do more, but we know that in a pinch they have at times provided that station for community meetings, and if need be, I'm sure they would do it again if we need to get a community rallying. Didn't take me much time to get people to rally around Mancini Park and for us to get money. So if I have to look for finding a way to get money, and I'm a good fundraiser, I will do it. But please, please consider the adverse effect to the community, not just our local little entity there of an unincorporated area, but the surrounding businesses there. Because there's been fires at the recycler and a dismantler, and if it hadn't been for them, we would have had a far worse situation. So please take that into consideration, that it would be very detrimental and would be adversely affecting our community. And we are already, as some people would like to say, somewhat disenfranchised by the mere location of where we are, because we are no man's land, because that's what we've been considered all these years. Thank you.
Good evening, City Council and Mayor. I just want to clear a couple things up. The first thing I want to touch on is the 2 in and 2 out. And when I don't want to take away any of your 35 years of service that I appreciate, I just want to clear a couple things up how we operate now. The 2 in and 2 out has been implemented in the county over the last 1.5 or 2 years. It's not a first engine company assignment where you split 2 people and the other 2 people go as their backup to the door. It is a dedicated assignment by an actual apparatus that's coming to the scene. So that is that's one crew's whole assignment. So if you imagine a fire in a box, the 2 in, 2 out assignment, this also plays into resource sharing. That's why we have it. If you have a box that's on fire, in order to enter that box in any doorway or window or even get on top, you have to have this 2 in, 2 out assignment in place, unless there's actually a known or possible rescue inside. Then the captain can make that discretion. That 2 in, 2 out rule goes out the window. Then we can make entry to make that possible rescue. So when it comes to, I also want to clear up that engine 16, which is the old station 2, is not a common assignment. It does not end up on North Modesto. In North Modesto and resource sharing. Station 16 does service on first alarm fires, the Yosemite corridor. There it's a common engine to cover Station 22, which is Empire. But 16 takes that spot because Modesto Engine 10 is a little south and west of where a lot of those calls are. So that's where the boundary zones are drawn. So for Engine 16 at the Pecos station to end up in North Modesto, it would take multiple large incidents in Modesto for that engine company to end up there. So some of the benefits of resource sharing, I'm sure most of you know, but when Ceres sends one resource to Modesto or to Stanislaus Consolidated, when this city has an incident, they send at least 2 apparatus and a chief to come help us. So us sending one crew up there, we're getting double for every call that they help us with. So on any first alarm call, like a fire call, the standard around here is we want 15 people on that scene on the first alarm. And we can't do that with 2 stations here and not having that resource sharing available, because if we wait and have a mutual aid agreement, like you said, Ms. Rhino, it would have to take another dispatch to get that engine rolling down the road to maybe fulfill that 2 in, 2 out position so we can actually start putting that fire out. So that's just some of the benefits of the resource sharing. It's not uncommon for this city. I say it all the time to my crew. I need to start making a tally sheet of when I'm on tour of how many calls this city runs, either all the apparatus on one call at one time or multiple calls back to back in this city. This city is stripped a lot with 3 stations open right now. We had a pin-in accident on Service Central the other day. The truck and the first in engine from Station 15 were tied up for it was at 28-minute extrication before we were able to allow the truck to roll up all their hose lines and everything with the extrication tools and get them available again. So it's not uncommon for us to dump all of our apparatus on calls, either at the same time on one incident or multiple back-to-back calls. When it comes to giving raises, you all heard we're willing to forego raises. We talk about demotions earlier and reorganizing, restructuring the department. For some of us, you could give a 10% raise to this whole city, but for some of us to get restructured, we're going to take a 20% pay hit tomorrow. So your 10% pay raise to me, I'm still going to take a 10% pay cut. And I know I'm not the only one. So that might happen in other areas of the city also if we restructure like that. So those are just a couple tidbits I had. So thank you for your time.
Good evening. I just wanted to get clarification throughout this process I watched tonight. I think you gave city manager direction to increase the capabilities of parks, recreation, PD. At the same breath, I believe you're talking about decreasing our capabilities in the fire service. Is that correct?
Correct.
That is correct. So we're the only department where our capabilities would be.
I don't think that's correct.
That is incorrect.
I don't think it's
that's
correct.
at all. I think what we're trying to do, Captain Miller, is see what we're doing as far as the city's concerned. We have some monies today in our time of this 2018, whatever the case is. And we're trying to make our city whole. We're trying to take care of a lot of things that we neglected during a long period of time. When I'm saying with parks, since, I don't know, we're talking about the years back, we had 14, 11 park people. Now we have 3, and all we're trying to do is try to see how things might need to be somewhat restructured. And maybe they don't need to be. Maybe at all. Maybe we're talking 3-0 staffing, We didn't hire any new police officers. We can't get any new ones, right? We have 3 that have been open for a while still today, right? And we have 2 of your fire positions that are open, correct? And they're budgeted in the budget. And it's a possibility that they're going to be put in there. And then you also need another couple more to get to 3-0 staffing. I get it. We've had so many conversations. Have we not?
Yes, we have.
And I've been a huge supporter. I think the whole council's been a huge supporter of the fire. We're just looking at things. That's it. It's a simple concept.
You're looking at decreasing our capabilities. During this next month, you will.
Is 2 fire stations better than with 4 people in it? We had that conversation.
It is not.
That's what we're asking. That is all we're asking. That's part of the process.
Right. I would never support 2 stations in this town with whatever staffing you give us. It's not enough to run the calls that we're going to get.
We gave direction to go 3 stations, 3-man, okay, 3-0 staffing. Gave direction for 2 station, 4-person station, okay, to get the numbers together to see where we are. We put the recreation manager on hold, okay. Currently, the recreation coordinator went from part-time to full-time because of the loss of the recreation manager. All we did was say we can extend it till the end of June. So, you know, it's not a full-time job. It's just going to be to there. Okay? We reclassified a job in Public Works. Okay? And eliminated, all we did was reclassify a job. We talked about the SRO and the recruitment of the position. So we did not add anything with the parks. All we did was basically approve for him to go out and get a couple temporary services to get the parks mowed and everything like that. I mean, you were at the street fair. I mean, the Whitmore Park needed to be mowed. So we just gave him direction to hire temporary staff for that, not a full-time staff. So I don't know where we authorize for the city to turn around and start staffing and for permanent positions on this. We gave him direction to bring us back numbers.
Correct. You gave him permission to bring back numbers for increasing the capabilities of those departments.
And we gave him back numbers to turn around and keep the fire department at 3-0 staffing.
Or decrease.
Or go to 4-0 staffing. But we didn't say we're going 3-0 staffing and we're eliminating that. We're going to two stations with 4-man. We gave him to ask us for both options. I don't know where we said we're just going to 2 stations and that's it. You know, that's where I'm lost. When you're saying we turned around and said, this is what we're doing, we're decreasing you. No, we asked for numbers. And we asked for numbers on both of them. Okay? I mean, I'll tell you right now, I had a discussion with Mr. Wells that I said we needed a fire chief before we needed a recreation manager. That's the discussion I had with Mr. Wells. Okay? So when you come up here, I'm offended personally, okay, when you say that we did this, because we didn't do that. We asked for numbers. That's what we did.
I just said you gave direction to the city manager.
Mike, real quick, let me try. So you've seen the current budget, what's being proposed, adding 2 firefighters right now that you need, right?
Correct.
That's the current budget.
Correct.
What Toby has asked, and we have agreed to, is what would 3-0 staffing look like? That would mean we'd have to hire 2 more firefighters. Okay, so that's adding, not decreasing. Right? That's adding 2 more on top of the 2. Okay, and then what 4-0 staffing looks like. Then we'd have to add another firefighter at 4-0 staffing. What's that look like? That's all we're asking. There's no decisions being made up here. None.
I was speaking to the direction you were giving him, and I wasn't talking about staffing. I was talking about reducing our capabilities with 2 stations.
No. We're asking to see what that looks like. We're not giving him the direction to, that's what we're going to do. We're asking to look at it. We want to see what it looks like. That's all.
Okay.
And when you and I sat down, said the same thing. And, you know, unfortunately, tonight it wasn't here. I've asked this council has asked this many, many times. And it's unfortunate that we don't have it all in front of us tonight to really get down and look at it. Because that's what I expected, and I know that's what I told you was going to happen. It didn't happen tonight. All right, so we're going to do it again. All right, but there's no, you know, direction giving permanently at this time at all. I just want you to be aware of that.
But to answer your question directly, that option is on the table, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening. Joe Spanny, Series Firefighters, Local 3636. Just to clear up a couple of points. Excuse me if I'm looking down every once in a while in my notes here. Talked about the Safer promotions really quick. When Safer guys were first hired, the initial 6, the promotions that were made were from firefighter to engineer. Those were going to happen regardless if those people were not going to get hired with that first Safer grant. Kind of moving on to the 4L staffing. If we went to a 2-station, 4-person company for 2 of those rigs, we would never be at four persons. We have people off every single day. The references City Manager Wells made to FMLA, that one is wrapped up this week. The long-term injury is possible going to be wrapping up this week. Even with those, we have injuries, we have babies, we have illness, we have vacations. Those positions, to make them 4.0, won't happen. Because those people, the 4 people will be used as relief individuals, and whenever there's an opening, they just won't get backfilled. So we'll be a city of 47,000 people with an additional 13,000 people within our Series Fire Protection District and Industrial Fire Protection District, totaling us at 60,000 people with 6 firefighters on 2 rigs. The math doesn't work on that. With 6,098 calls that happened in the year 2017, it's not going to work. It's going to result in injuries. It's going to result in, we've already had the conversation that we're not going to refer to doom and gloom and people are going to die. Realistically, better possibility with that staffing model versus this 3.0 staffing model that we have right now. Some of the statistics or the numbers that City Manager already provided, going to 4.0 would only save you a net of about $175,000. Now that doesn't talk about adding another firefighter at $120,000. And there was also a savings if there was a reduction in rank of about $100,000. So that net savings of closing down another station and having 2 4-person companies would only be $100,000. He already gave you those numbers tonight. I wrote them down as he spoke. And excuse me just one second. Also touching base with what Councilman DeRossett already mentioned, we gave back $320,000 to the federal government at the expiration of our 2-year grant, when we could have easily asked for a grant extension, which was already spoken to by President Miller and City Manager Wells with those individuals who said that wouldn't be problems to extend that time frame and use that $320,000. Ms. Dean quoted a high estimate of $30,000 of uncovered costs to finish out the fiscal year 2017-2018. But instead, City Manager Wells has already talked about we're spending $28,000 in overtime per pay period. But we really need to think this through before we make any decisions about reducing the number of apparatus that are on the road available to respond to calls. I believe that's all I have.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Turlock is roughly how many citizens?
I believe it's around 75.
75,000? Okay.
And I can just to head off real quick, they're grossly understaffed.
No, but how many stations do they have?
Right now they have 4.
They have how many?
4 stations.
4 stations? Okay.
They have 3 peoples per, and I believe their total staffing within their fire department is about 48 staff, compared to our 27?
31 total.
31?
But, I mean, just in retrospect, Ceres is 48,000 people with 3 stations.
But again, our service area is 60,000 people.
But-
60,000.
Pardon?
We serve 60,000.
That's because of,
Series Fire Protection District,
Okay.
industrial contract.
all right.
I bet you they serve way more than 75,000.
They do
No,
not.
they actually
They
have.
serve the city limits only.
So more people that come to that town, you figure, with the things that they have to deal with in regards to medical calls and all that other
Their
stuff.
service population is their city population. They
Right.
don't have, they have Turlock Rural Fire District, which covers the area outside their city limits.
So they don't count that they have 1 million people in their town every day and we have 55,000.
They don't have 1 million people in
I'm
their
just
town.
saying.
Yeah,
The
but,
only
but,
difference
but
they have is-
here's where
I know where
I'm
you're
just looking at. We got 48,000 people in our town. At 3 stations, that's 16,000 people per station. For them, it's 75,000 people at 4 stations. That's 18,750 residents per station.
And they are understaffed.
And I understand. I'm just putting things in retrospect.
I understand.
Because if you turn around and you go to Modesto and you turn around and you can do the same thing to see, where it's at. I mean, yes, I live in the area of the station, I think it's 4.
Yes,
Or,
18.
okay, and I agree with Mr. Shepherd that, to me, that station should have been pushed out a little bit maybe further, northeast or something. But that's all water behind a bridge. But that's just the question I had. I'm fine.
And one last thing, to address the cost of running Station 2 being about $1 million, is that the ballpark?
Well, staffing exclusively is about 1.3, 1.2, 1.3. We haven't calculated what the actual, station costs are, but somewhere in that neighborhood.
So Station 16, that Pecos station runs, I think it's around 2,300 calls a year.
Sounds right.
It's ballpark. Only a third of those calls are for the Industrial Fire Protection District. 2/3 of those calls are for areas that the city actually has up in that area. So if that station were to shut down, the response times would be well greater than 6 minutes to get up into those pockets. And to lose that extra $237,000 has no net positive for us. Your net positive would only be about 150 per the numbers that we've been listening to tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
Yeah, my name is Lee Brandt, and I just want to be, real quick about this. And I understand that you guys are just want to look at numbers, but don't forget, if you go down to 2 stations, our homeowners' insurance is going to go up for everybody in the city because we're not going to have the response time.
How much does it cost to run a truck, for a truck to go on a run? Do you know?
Ballpark number, if you were to say total cost of the fire department divided by the 6,000 calls. So ballpark number would say $1,000 per call, but
Okay.
that's just a wild wag.
Okay. 2 years ago, my husband was dying of stomach cancer, and hospice was paid and is paid by the government to help us. My husband got out of the hospital bed that was in the home, and he fell. So I called hospice, and I said, I need help. I'm alone here. I cannot lift my husband. They said, call the fire department. And I said, no. I'm not going to have a fire truck show up at 4 o'clock in the morning at the expense of the city when I know you're not going to get the money back. So I called my daughter in Modesto to come and help me move my husband to the couch where he wanted to be, where he laid for 9 days before he died. Did you ever think on these calls, maybe you ought to look into recovering some of the money that hospice is telling people to call the fire department?
I believe the city of Ripon right now is in the process of trying to do that.
Now, they're trying to get the money back from insurance companies. Hospice is paid by the government. It's part of our Social Security. It's part of our right to die. So you have a way to get money by doing that. You can't depend on just cannabis, which you probably will, believe it or not, tax out of the city. California is a big state. Cannabis can go anywhere. That's it.
Anyone else? Okay. With that, I think that, is there anyone else on the council that had any final comments before we move on to referrals? Okay, is there anyone on the council who would like an item placed on a future agenda, other than the ones that we talked about this evening? Okay, none. Reports, I have nothing to report. Councilmember Rhino?
Just a reminder, I will be gone June the 11th.
Okay. Vice Mayor Klein?
I have nothing.
Councilmember Lane?
I have nothing, Mayor.
Councilmember Drossett?
Nothing, Mayor.
Justine? Tom? Nothing, Mayor. Mr. Wells?
One thing on the agenda, we do not need the conference with labor negotiator this evening, so seeing as it's 9:30, that worked out well. Measure L Citizen Advisory Committee was notified this week that Larry Liu is moving to Modesto, so unfortunately he will not be able to represent us on the Measure L Citizens Advisory Committee, so we will be posting that notice on our website seeking for folks who might be interested in serving in that capacity. We need to get that filled as soon as possible. Just a reminder, our Concerts in the Park series begins on June 5th, and the Measure H Oversight Committee, as I mentioned earlier, will be on June 6th.
Okay. Tom? Daryl? Fred? Rick? Bettina? Jeremy? Mr. Miller? Okay. Supervisor DiMartini? Okay. With that, we will adjourn. I believe we have no closed session this evening. Is that correct?
Yeah, no closed session. I would reference that we do have a meeting with the Ceres Mobile Home Park tomorrow evening at Beaver Elementary School on the public notice of the water quality issues there.
Okay. So we will adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting, which will be Monday, June 11th.
Oh, wait, we'll go outside, sign that.
What's that?
Outside.